Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the 20th of November. It's actually a 5 minutes, the hour of 3 o'clock following the Vietnam time. And I know in some of you it's evening or morning, but nonetheless, we welcome you to this first AIT Alumni Association Global Symposium. So this afternoon, we are opening the first technical session, which is on energy, environment, and climate change. We have actually decided to have two parallel sessions, which will be moderated by two distinguished professors, whom I'm going to introduce later on. I'm Alvin Kulaba, also an AIT alumni, Energy Technology 1990, currently professor at the De La Salle University in Manila, Philippines. So I'm based now here in Manila, which is actually an hour ahead of the time of Vietnam or in Bangkok. Okay, so there are 3 speakers on each of the 2 parallel sessions, of whom will be formally introduced by the moderators. The session would last, the parallel session would last about an hour. We expect about 15 to 20 minutes talk from each of the speakers. And then later on, we will have to go back to the plenary, where we are going to hear 2 also distinguished panel of discussants. And if time permits, we will have time for question and answer before we finally close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, again, Vietnam time. In other words, for this entire session, we have 2 hours. So let me introduce the first moderator. Professor Shubhankar Dakkal is the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand, since April 2020. In the past, he was Dean of School of Environment, Resources and Development, and Head of Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Change of Asian Institute of Technology. His main areas of expertise are in energy policy, climate change mitigation and policies, policy modeling and analysis, and cities and climate change. Professor Dakkal actively contributes to international and scientific arena. He is the coordinating lead author of the Nobel Prize-winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 5th Assessment Report for the chapter on human settlements, infrastructure, and spatial planning, and the 6th Assessment Report for the chapter on emissions, trends, and drivers. He was also a member of the author group who developed a recent UNEP, or United Nations Environment Program-led global scientific assessment titled Making Peace with Nature, launched by UN Secretary General and UNEP Executive Director in February 2021, led by Bob Watson and Ivar Andreas Baste. The second parallel session will be moderated by equally distinguished Professor Sankar Bhattacharya. He is a professor of chemical engineering at Monash University, Australia. He came to academia in 2009 and having worked in energy industries and research establishments in India on power station design and commissioning, in France, International Energy Agency, leading the Cleaner Fossil Fuels Program, and in Australia, the pilot plant operation of gasification and CFBC plants. He has graduated 27 PhD students and 3 MS students to completion and is currently supervising 16 PhD students on gasification, CO2 capture, rare earth metal recovery, and platform chemicals from biomass. He is the holder of 3 patents, edited 3 books, authored 6 book chapters, and over 160 journal papers on energy, fuels, waste processing, gasification, and biochemicals. Gasification work has progressed to commercialization, and his group worked on processing e-waste, waste polymers, waste tires, waste optical fibers, and is proceeding to pilot trials. Professor Bhattacharya has Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering degree from Jadavpur University in India, Master of Engineering in Energy Technology from AIT, and a PhD in Chemical Engineering from University of Newcastle, and diplomas in management from the Melbourne Business School. Professor Bhattacharya is a fellow of the Australian Institute of Energy. So ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to break into 2 parallel sessions to be led by Dr. Bakal and Dr. Bhattacharya. You may now choose to log in to any of the breakout sessions, and after that, there will be no questions on those sessions. We will return to the plenary for the panel discussion. So again, welcome to this technical session 1 on energy, environment, and climate change. Good afternoon, everyone.
Just give just a minute. Maybe many of our colleagues are joining to this particular breakout group. Yeah, I'd like to check with our speakers. Yes, I can see that 2 of the speakers are already there. I'm trying to see if Dr. Bapon is already there, one of our speakers.
Professor Dakal, Alvin here. Yeah,
Yes.
you may, if the first speaker is not yet available, you may proceed with the next speaker. We'll just come back to him. Thank you.
Once again, welcome to this session. This session is a breakout session, session 1A of our session in energy, environment, and climate change. My name is Sobhakar Dhakal, which the chair very kindly introduced already. This afternoon in Bangkok and Vietnam, maybe not afternoon, maybe morning for some of you, and maybe some of you a little bit evening. But wherever you are, welcome again. We have 3 distinguished speakers with us this afternoon. These 3 speakers are going to talk to us regarding multiple dimensions of climate change. That dimensions are on climate change mitigation. Some of the global discussions which is going on right now, as you know, that COP26 has concluded in city of Glasgow in Scotland, and we are now taking a stock of outcome of the COP26. Also, we have colleagues talking to us regarding climate change adaptation, especially from disaster risk reduction, DRR. So in our session, we are going to cover both mitigation as well as adaptation side, especially from the disaster risk reduction, DRR perspective. So I think, in the interest of time, without going into too much further details of the session, which I'm sure you know it very well. This is very, very timely topic, very, very timely session. The first speaker this afternoon is going to be Professor Joyce Roy. Professor Joyce Roy is an economist, energy and climate scientist. She comes from India. She is the inaugural Bangabandhu Chair Professor at Asian Institute of Technology, and she was appointed to a Bangabandhu Chair on Sustainable Energy in 2008. She also lectures at AIT's Department of Energy, Environment, Climate Change. Professor Roy earned a doctorate degree from Jadavpur University. She was an Indian Council of Social Sciences Research Fellow and the Ford Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in the United States. She is among the network of scientists who shared in the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize awarded to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and served as a coordinating lead author of industry chapter of Working Group 3 of 4th Assessment Report of IPCC and also the 5th Assessment Report of IPCC. Professor Roy has been named as a recipient of 2021 Paradigm Award by the Breakthrough Institute. Breakthrough Institute is a global think tank based in California, United States, in recognition of Professor Joyce's work on rebound in emerging economies, which has influenced the thinking and research not only around the role of energy efficiency, but also the nature of economic growth itself and the energy transition as an emergent phenomenon. With that, we are very much privileged to have Professor Roy with us this afternoon. Professor Roy, you have the floor. We'll be playing her recorded speech, but she's also online with us. Can we play Professor Roy's speech, please?
I intend to present a Global South perspective because in this century, it is the Global South who will need to enhance well-being of their people in a carbon-constrained world to transform their societies. Climate change is an unprecedented challenge to human society. State of the climate system will determine economic outcome. An economic development model each country takes up will also determine the state of the climate system. Let us understand where are we now in terms of climate change. 2018 special report of IPCC on global warming says that human activities have caused approximately 1 degree Celsius of global warming since pre-industrial level. And already we are seeing consequences for people, nature, and livelihood. Critical human capital like human health, variety of natural capital like coral reefs, coasts, etc., and human activities like tourism, etc., are facing higher risks. Every bit of warming matters, every year matters, and every choice matters now. It is also known that energy use pattern in various economic sectors are leading to the greenhouse gas emissions. Electricity production, industrial production, and transport sector are the major emitters. Land use change through deforestation are also contributes, but less than the energy-related emissions. Let us also remember that it is the demand for energy which is driving the economic activities and also the population growth which are driving emissions. Although income growth, which is the dark blue, is also representing higher demand for activities and the emission growth. So income growth drives demand and has production and hence emissions. If we look at the developing country at this juncture, the real question is, so fast-growing developing countries of 21st century are in deep dilemma. Should they stop growing or keep growing, or how to grow differently? They cannot replicate the growth path of South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, or China, because they could maintain greater than 7% growth rate because of either heavy dependence on cheap coal or oil. Black is the coal, and blue, light blue is the oil. So we can see that it was more fossil fuel dependent growth path. The relative cheapness of the solar energy and wind energy have also changed these centuries, a relative market readiness of the technologies. So it is possible now to produce same output with 5 times less energy need through energy efficiency improvement. So now the question is, in IPCC report of 1.5, the 4 paths have been presented, and the world has to decide which development pathway to follow. It is possible to focus on human well-being and demand-side energy use reduction strategies and avoid any large-scale dependence on uncertain technologies in future years, which is the first low energy demand scenario. Whereas the rightmost shows the fossil fuel, and to push the decision by betting on uncertain technologies like bioenergy, carbon capture, and storage. Now, if we focus on the supply side, there are alternative futures where greenhouse gas emissions will decrease drastically, but the primary energy consumption will not decrease so much because of the increase in renewable energies, and resource need for the developing world is not going to reduce. This is, of course, the results for Asia following the IPCC 4 pathways, which I have already shown. However, there are various ways to reduce demand for energy and reduce the supply side investment need and wasteful energy consumption. I just want to show that past century story was one of coupling of energy use and economic activity. If you look into the India's industry sector, it was the story of coupling. 1 unit of GDP needed 1 unit of energy. But what happened is that gradually with the technology improvement and the energy intensity reduction and along this green path, the activity growth and the emission and the energy need has been decoupled compared to previous decades, and now they are relatively decoupling from each other because of the technological progress. So there is, of course, the worldwide energy intensity improvement we can see for all the different regions in the world. Energy efficiency is improving. Also, the IPCC report of 2014 clearly shows that the investment will be rising is in the energy efficiency across sectors, whereas investment is expected to go down in extraction of fossil fuel power plants without carbon capture and storage, and clean energy fuel, the investment will go up. So the question is, the transition of the social systems are going to be dominated by the energy transitions, but not that in each country is taking advantage of investment scope and possibility. If we look at different countries, their GDP growth rate and the energy growth rate, still there is strong coupling between energy and the GDP growth and the energy intensity is actually higher in Bangladesh, whereas in many countries they are declining. Although in South Korea during their fast growing phase, it was more coupled growth. But in Bangladesh, there is possibility of taking advantage of energy intensity investment, and so that the energy efficiency can improve. So there is important, what we need to understand is that there is scope for the developing countries now to make progress in terms of demand side reduction. So in IPCC report, we could show that the energy demand side actions, like, as I said, the energy efficiency improvement, or say, for example, reduction in waste in energy, all these things can help in getting more health benefit, like these are the SDG benefits, so human health benefit, water related benefit, and multiple benefits in terms of SDGs. So one can pursue the climate action as well as which will help in advancing the sustainable development goals, but not so much if we are concentrating more on the energy supply side. So focusing on energy demand side gives us much larger benefit in terms of economic benefits as well. So developing countries where new industrialization will happen, we are showing in our recent publication that there is possibility of adopting circular economy concept, and also maybe the industrial symbiosis and eco-industrial park to be considering, because they can help in avoiding the emission and which are considered as preventive actions. If we look at the transport sector, the compact cities and reduction in ownership of vehicle by following more public transport can provide this preventive action benefit and can avoid emission. Similarly, in the buildings also, the passive building design and then energy saving behavior can help in advancing the emission reduction. So what we are trying to show in our one of the very recent publications done with climate strategies is that critical junction on the energy journey to 1.5 degree. We know that this decade is going to be a decisive decade, and we need to reduce GHG emission, but selecting into different intervention areas. So where to focus on, but then this can help, means that acceleration to deliver net zero goal of mid-century, because 2020 is a significant year. It marked a turning point in GHG emissions. So for net zero, this reduction in 2020 needs to be repeated each year for next 2 decades, starting from 2021. So this is something which is very important, that we are seeing that there are 6 sensitive intervention points which can help in achieving these goals. And what are these 6 sensitive points? So in the renewables should be coming in more and more, and the fossil fuels should be going out. And the rate is that globally in 2020, where 25% of electricity was from renewable, in 2030, it should be 65%. And simultaneous actions are needed in electrification of energy services and energy efficient appliances, upward revision of energy efficiency standards, preference of shift from ownership to usership, as I have already mentioned, new business models for electricity trading. The second one is about zero emission transport. And as I said, we need to double the public transport usage, and electrification of transport sector is an important area. Aviation use need to be reducing, and there should be efficiency in equipments. And in the shipping sector, actually, many big shipping companies are coming up with net zero pledges. So in the to change the demand, as I said earlier, also what we need is the food and dietary system, where a major shift from animal source product to plant-based diets and the reduction of food waste can significantly reduce emissions. And we are already seeing that US, UK, and Sweden have been showing signs of reducing meat consumption within a range of 14 to 23%. Heavy industries need to commit to science-based targets, and energy-intensive industries like cement, iron, and steel must commit to carbon neutrality through technological innovation, such as electrification, green hydrogen, and carbon removal. Human settlements need to be zero carbon, zero emissions building and infrastructure are a must. And existing building stock need to decarbonize by at least 3% annually, starting now by adopting retrofits. And there are one thing is very important, that there has to be sink capacity increase, and which is now said to be like nature-based solution or ecosystem-based solutions, which means reforestation of forests. Coastal ecosystem can shift land use from being a source of emission to net sink for storing carbon. So if we can continue to do all these reduction, then we see that the reduction potential is almost 70% in this decade along these green growth strategies. So in our another recent publication, what we showed is that the aim is to aim for rapid growth in developing countries to enhance the human well-being with disaster resilience. What is really needed is investment in 5 kinds of capital. And 5 kinds of capitals are like natural capital, human capital, social capital, knowledge capital, and physical capital. And these are some of the examples: that good quality of air, water, forest, climate system, we need to make investment for. We need trained human capacity to deliver the change. We need trustworthy governance, and baseline data are needed for all these with georeference data of critical infrastructure, vulnerable population. And we do need investment in early warning system, efficient buildings, railroads, public buses, as we have already said, water treatment plants. So these are the ones where if investment is made, then we can break the vicious cycle and can go for virtuous cycle, which can help in sustaining the economies. So basically what we are saying is that we have seen for Bangladesh what is holding back the penetration of renewable energy. Most important are the human capacity and the lack of policy towards those. So this is something which is very important, that we need to break the barriers to advance these economies. And our analysis shows that the 2020 is a significant year. The global investment requirement for a Paris-compatible pathway has been estimated to be $1.4 trillion per year in the period 2020 to 24, because everybody asks whether we have money for doing all these. Our answer is that yes, we do have money, because the global stimulus packages in response to the COVID-19 is amounting to 12 trillion, and we need 1.4 trillion, which means that we need only 10% of this global package, so that can deliver the Paris compatible low carbon growth path, and which is also green growth path. So 2020 is a significant year. So now, as we are starting the new decade, the question is, the world has a unique opportunity to reshape the future in these new directions. So are we going to do that? So that is something very important, and we all need to be working towards that. And I think educational institutions like AIT has a very important role to play by creating the human capacity to deliver this change in this decade. And being a regional institute, it caters to the human capacity building of this region. And in this energy transition, AIT can play a very important role. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Roy. Thank you for that very insightful global perspective, also keeping the global South into that picture. May I now invite Mr. Ha Dang Son. Mr. Ha Dang Son is going to deliver talk to us regarding pathways to carbon neutral power sector, challenge and opportunities for Vietnam. Mr. Son is the director of the Center for Energy and Green Growth Research, which is a non-profit research and consulting organization under Vietnam Union of Science and Technology Associations. And he has been working actively in research and consulting work in a wide range of expertise, including clean energy, climate change and carbon finance, green growth and sustainable development. Mr. Son is currently leading a technical team in USAID Vietnam low emission energy program to support Ministry of Industry and Trade on applying the new power planning methodology for the Vietnam's power sector Plan 8 to adapt with a higher penetration of renewable energy into the grid. He also serves as a key policy advisor to the Electricity Regulatory Authority of Vietnam in developing the pilot direct power purchase agreement for Vietnam, and works with the Department of Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Development in Ministry of Industry and Trade to develop minimum energy performance standards and renewable energy certificate system for power and industrial sectors. Mr. Son got Master of Engineering in Industrial System Engineering, ISE, from AIT in 1998. With this, may I invite Dr. Son to please kindly deliver his speech. Can we play Mr. Son's video recording, please? Mr. Son is also with us here.
Good afternoon. My name is Ha Dang Son. And this is my pleasure to present in the first global AITAA symposiums and exhibition. Let's start with a presentation now. With the title Pathway to a Carbon Neutral Power Sector, the Challenges and Opportunity for Vietnam. So we know that the power system in Vietnam consists of different types of power resources. We have hydropower, we have thermal power plants such as coal and gas, we have wind, we have solar, and we also have biomass. And in general, the renewable energy, the share of the renewable energy in Vietnam power sector is about 55%, including hydropower. Talking about the power sector, we know that no power plant is perfect with regard to the environmental aspect. For instance, with the hydropower, we have the environmental concern about reallocation, livelihoods, deforestation, ecosystem degradation, changes in the hydrological regimes, with thermal power plant, we have problem with the air pollutions due to the PM, NOx, and SOx. Specifically with the coal-fired power plant, we have to deal with the large amount of solid waste coming out from the bottom ash or the fly ash. And the main concern at the moment, given the COP26 just happened last week, climate change impact due to fossil fuels burning is the global concern at the moment. Looking at the alternative power sources, the so-called variable renewable energy like solar or wind, we still have problem with regard to the deforestation, ecosystem degradation, solid waste collection and treatment. We also have to deal with the other problems just like fines, noises, and other social environmental impacts. So again, nothing's perfect and poorly clean, but we have to select between different sources to find out what could be the best option to go, given all the pros and cons. Back to Vietnam, when you talk about the Paris Agreement, about the nationally contributed contribution commitment, we talk about GHG emission from power sector. Our analysis shows that the GHG emission from Vietnam power sector following the recent Drought PDP8 is very close to hit the bar, the allowed emission quota based on the unconditional emission reduction committed by the government of Vietnam. And we know that the International Energy Agency recently presented an ambitious roadmap toward the net zero for the energy sector. And even though we deal with different subsector like power sector, building, transport, industry, and other like residential, but the key point highlighted would be like each country needs to bring a lot of wind and solar for the power sector to replace the fossil fuels. Okay, now Vietnam. If you look at the non-hydro renewable energy potential, we can see that Vietnam has the good potential about solar, very good potential about the onshore wind, and given the very, very long coastal boundary of Vietnam, so Vietnam has a very, very good potential about offshore wind. And starting from like early 2000s, Vietnam already have a renewable energy action plan with the support from the World Bank. But the focus at the time is mainly about the small hydro development. And of course, with the electrification, with the grid development for Vietnam. So for many years, we didn't see much development of the new renewable energy kind of like solar or wind, mainly is small hydro, until 2015, when the government of Vietnam start to issue the renewable energy development strategy. This is brought up quite ambitious target on solar and wind at that time. And starting from that moment on, Vietnam have, with the support from many donors, has developed a lot of analysis, report, For instance, you look at the Vietnam Energy Outlook that the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam has developed with the support from the Danish government, and it came up with quite ambitious target. For instance, okay, let's go in the power mix, and we have more wind, more solar, and especially with much more offshore wind. And just this year, 2021, then with the support from the World Bank, Vietnam has the first time the offshore wind roadmap for the development of the totally new type of renewable energy in the country. Looking back 5 years since the renewable energy development strategy, we can see clearly that the power mix back in 2015 is nearly nothing. A few wind, nearly no solar, but by 2020, we have a lot of rooftop solar, we have a lot of solar utility scale, and we start to look at the wind with more wind. And let's see what happened with the country after that. There are significant
Hello. Let me check.
Yes.
Anyway, Professor Dakal, meantime, they are fixing technically. Maybe we can just have a conversation with our participants here. There are about 20. You may wish to just open up the discussion while waiting for it. Thank you.
Yes, I think as the technology, we said that technology is a solution to climate change, but as you see that technology is a solution, but technology does not work always. That's why I think I agree with what Professor Joyce said here, is that yes, technology is a solution, but also we need something more whenever we need to deal with the climate change, especially the behavioral change and some of the other things that we need to make technology to work. So I think with that note, also I'd also like to note that what Professor Joyce said in her talk, that near-term efforts are very important, particularly for 2030. What we do, how we do. So this particular decade is very, very important in order to address the issue of climate change. I think as we solve the technology, maybe some colleague want to jump in. Please ask. I think the case from Vietnam was very, very interesting, that Vietnam is going quite aggressively on renewable energy and development in order to meet the power development plans, eighth cycle of the power development plan of Vietnam. And we are quite excited to see lots of effort going on renewable energy. I think this really help us with number of other domains also, because please remember that energy and climate change is not only about energy or climate change. It is also about the other sustainable development goals, because energy and climate are very much intricately linked with many different aspects of sustainable development goals, which are very, very crucial for us to meet, especially in the global South. So yeah, please feel free to put one or two comments, as we are fixing the technology here.
May I just put one remark, small remark?
Yes, please.
I'm Ekraj Oza from Nepal. I'm HSD 1995 alumnus. Currently, I have been teaching sustainable development for the last 20 years in Nepal and also abroad now and then. My question, I first of all wish to appreciate both the speakers. There are very important issues discussed. However, again, technology that really appeared to be the main issue during the presentation, technological failure. Again, what I feel is that it's again technology that is needed to overcome this kind of technological constraints or shortcomings. That's one. Another regarding
sorry to interrupt here. I'm really sorry to interrupt. Professor Sawakar, so is it possible, like Mr. Alvin requested me, like we can run the second presentation again from starting? So is it required that we can start? I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We can start the video, second video.
Sure,
is it okay?
Sure,
Okay.
sure, please. Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Oza. So we'll take up your question maybe during the discussion session.
Yeah, sure. Mr. Dakal, thank you. No problem. I can continue later.
Shubheksa, you just start from 6 minutes.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Hydro development. And of course, with the electrification, with the grid development for Vietnam. So for many years, we didn't see much development of the new renewable energy kind of like solar or wind, mainly is small hydro, until 2015, when the government of Vietnam start to issue the renewable energy development strategy. This is brought up quite ambitious target on solar and wind at that time. And starting from that moment on, Vietnam have, with the support from many donors, has developed a lot of analysis report. For instance, you look at the Vietnam Energy Outlook that the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam has developed with the support from the Danish government, and it came up with quite ambitious target. For instance, okay, let's go in the power mix, and we have more wind, more solar, and especially much more offshore wind. And just this year, 2021, and with the support from the World Bank, Vietnam has the first time the offshore wind roadmap for the development of the totally new type of renewable energy in the country. Looking back 5 years since the renewable energy development strategy, we can see clearly that the power mix back in 2015 is nearly nothing. A few wind, nearly no solar, but by 2020, we have a lot of rooftop solar, we have a lot of solar utility scale, and we start to look at the wind with more wind. And let's see what happened with the country after that. There are significant growth of the solar, both utility scale and the rooftop solar in the last 2 years. And with the wind, we also see magnificent development of the wind project in Vietnam and reached nearly 4 gigawatt of wind power plant just in the October 2021. However, variable renewable energy like wind and solar also facing problem with the balancing, the curtailment and dispatching. This is making on those type power sources not operate quite well at the moment with the power system of Vietnam. We can see that with a lot of solar, the power system has to deal with the duck curve. This is the peak during the noontime, and because of the imbalance in the non-hydro energy development with too much solar, insignificant wind and biomass recently, so there can be kind of like pressure on the national dispatch center to balance and making sure that the power system work well and reliable. And you see that the national dispatch center have to deal with a lot of like ramp up, ramp down with the conventional power generation from the thermal, from the hydro, just to make sure that the system can survive with more and more wind and solar in the system. Another challenge is that given that the current power development plan is just based on a mixture between the conventional fossil fuel-based generation, just like coal or gas. Now, let's look at the situation if the coal and the gas investment could not be delivered in time. And the government of Vietnam will need much more capacity of wind and solar to compensate the shortage of the generation capacity from coal and gas in that case. Another obstacle, another challenge that the renewable energy had to deal with is the shortage of the inter-regional transmission. To transport the electricity generated from the renewable energy, from the wind and solar, from the areas they rich in the renewable energy potential, but it's very low in the demand, to the area where you have a lot of demand, but shortage of the resources, the renewable energy resources. So if you look at the table, you look at the situation in Vietnam, you can see that the significant penetration of low-cost distributed battery storage can be a game changer for renewable energy development in Vietnam in the near future. And about the future of the grid, especially with the smart grid, then you see that people need to change the way they look at the grid, not the traditional one. It's just one-way power system coming from the power plant to the consumer. Now it's kind of like everything is cloud and distributed and two-way power flow with more flexibility in the network. In the future, we can see clearly that given the distributed nature, the decentralization nature of the variable renewable energy like wind and solar, then the grid should be decentralized also. So we have to think about like moving from centralized directional grid to distributed energy and bidirectional energy balancing system to serve all the demand in the country. And last but not least, people keep talking about money, investment, like the investment, the capital and money. I just want to quote the statement from the IEA executive director. He mentioned that there's no shortage of money worldwide, but the governments need to give international public finance institutions a strong strategic mandate to finance green energy transition in the developing world. And we can see clearly that this recent effort by the government of Vietnam is quite attractive, it's committed, and we hope that they will come with more and more investment and support coming to Vietnam in the coming years to help the development of the renewable energy in a sustainable way, more reliable power system in the country, and it will be the only way for to go for carbon neutral target that we keep talking about, net zero. So it's very short, but thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Son. Thank you so much for a very enlightening presentation regarding situation of Vietnam. You know, especially I was quite interested to see that in the future of Vietnam's power development plan, there is lots of role for relatively clean energy such as LNG, but also more and more renewable energy. I think these are hopeful signs, but as you said, that financing, technology, and other things, something that we need to think of. With that, once again, thank you. May I now invite our third speaker, Dr. Bapon Fakhruddin. Dr. Fakhruddin is an eminent hydrometeorologist and disaster risk assessor with 19 years of global experience in water resources and climate resilience projects. His key area of expertise are on hazard forecasting, climate and multi-hazard risk assessments, and coastal community resilience. His most high-profile work is evidenced in development of multi-hazard warning system, including a tsunami warning system developed for the Indian Ocean countries following the deadly 2004 tsunami. He has since designed and helped to implement the climate change and disaster risk projects for more than 25 countries across the Asia and the Pacific. Dr. Fakhruddin has played a pivotal role in design and implementation of multi-hazard early warning systems for floods, cyclones, tsunami, which are really crucial to save human lives and, of course, livelihood, while also reducing the property damages. Dr. Fakhruddin is currently working as a technical director for disaster risk and climate resilience in Tonkin and Taylor International in New Zealand. And he also works with the University of Auckland in mentor and supervisor capacity. He's also providing leadership, staying in the steering group of Global Risk Assessment Framework, also disaster loss data and risk perception and application working group of IRDR. Also, he's co-chairing co-data task force task group in the FAIR Data for Disaster Risk Reduction and Research Program Board as a member of which is a member of GEO. With that, let me invite Dr. Bapon Fakhruddin to deliver his insightful talk today. Can we play his talk, please? Thank you.
welcome from New Zealand. It's been a pleasure to back to the AITAA to give a talk on some of the work that we are carrying on in the Pacific Island. I'll be talking today on the impact-based early warning system in the Pacific perspectives. As last 2 weeks, I think everyone was quite busy to spending their time looking at the COP26, and there has been so much information product has been discussing about the climate change impact, how we can actually reduce our emission, as well as lots of commitment. And there are, other than the COP26 or Paris Agreement, we are also trying to chasing the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Sustainable Development Goal, as well as New Urban Agenda. All the global framework who are trying to chasing the 2030 global agenda are highly acknowledge the multi-hazard impact-based early warning system. And that's one of the key to reducing our damages as well as saving our lives. So in that perspective, it's quite important to having a multi-hazard impact-based forecasting system in place. However, the system is quite complex in a sense. As you can see on the left side diagram, it has a 4-dimensional activities. We are trying to chase what's going to happen from hour to century. On the other side, we're trying to understand what could contribute to the global, national, subnational, as well as local aspect. Also, we need to understand hazard exposure, vulnerability, as well as overall risk, and then how those are actually impacting to our differential sector in the infrastructure, ecology, and economic. So it's not a one easy way to solve the problem, but rather than actually quite multi-agency coordination as well as integration is quite important. As you can see that when you are trying to look at from climate change aspect, starting with
the
hour
end
to
session
century,
is still
there are
a
actually
couple of
different products
minutes.
exist. Starting with our weather forecast, mid-range forecast, seasonal forecast, sub-seasonal forecast, and then climate change projection. And each of those forecasts has a different variability. It brings different climate-related or weather-related hazard, and it has a different forecast lead time as well. So how those trying to impact our, as a personal, as a sector, or as a society is quite important to understand and defining their mitigation aspect. If I just go back a little bit on the history of the early warning systems, as you can see that till 1980s, we were trying to focus more on the saving lives. And then after 1990, it was more on the saving lives and livelihood systems. In 2000, we were talking more about how actually we can bring some people-centered approach or people-centered early warning system. And currently, we're trying to operationalize with lots of innovation and emerging forecasts with new technologies such as ensemble or probabilistic forecasting. And you can see that throughout the time frame, 1961 to right now, with different actually global agenda try to force us to develop these activities. However, there are actually several challenges in setting up or implementing, as well as see some impact on early warning system in the community or in the as a country. There are always some unrealistic pressure on science to make a difference. As I said, science have some limitation. As a human being or as a sector, we may have a differential lead time requirement. So for an example, we may like to have a quite reliable 10 days forecast or 15 days forecast or month-long forecast, but I think you're not able to get that kind of accuracy when it goes to the longer lead time. And then there are also a lot of advanced research. Those are not actually coming to the operational domain, and many of those operational forecasting actually doesn't actually reflect to the.
Sorry, Professor Dakal, for that interruption.
Yes, I think we had some interruption again.
Yes, we may continue so that we can complete our session and then return to the main. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll share the video again.
Yes, please.
Requirement. For an example, we may like to have a quite reliable 10 days forecast or 15 days forecast or month-long forecast, but I think you're not able to get that kind of accuracy when it goes to the longer lead time. And then there are also a lot of advanced research. Those are not actually coming to the operational domain, and many of those operational forecasting actually doesn't actually reflect to the decision-making process. Communication as well as risk communication is quite a problematic. We often actually doesn't understand how a data could be translated to an information and how the information could be created knowledge. And when you don't able to generate those kind of information, there is actually fatigue, there is a hesitancy to accept those kind of information. And it's the same could be related with the vaccine hesitancy that you can see in the community at this moment. And also there are always actually lessons that has identified, but we actually doesn't learn the lessons. We established an end-to-end multi-hazard early warning system framework where actually we try to talk about 10 essential elements to achieve the Sendai framework goal target G, which is all the countries who signed the Sendai agreement, they should have a national level early warning system in place. And to having those things, as you can see, it's become a system of a system. So it has started with the institutional development, as well as Earth data observation, information generation, modeling, impact-based forecast generation, how the warning product could be generated, how it will be disseminated, what are the means of communication, and then how actually you translate those communication into a interpretation, risk assessment, as well as interpret and translate those risks so that actually our community could understand and respond or develop some sort of response framework to manage those consequences. And also as one of the critical part of early warning system is that sending the information to the people who are actually needed the most and more early rather than late, and as well as to understand what that information means, what that risk, what the hazard forecasting means to them, what kind of risk it's generating. So understanding the overall risk assessment to their area, what are their risk governance is working in the community or at the national level, how we do the risk register, as well as risk awareness and risk perception is quite important. If you don't have those combination, we often actually don't build trust. And then you can actually do that risk interpretation as well as risk treatment. And we often actually doesn't try to look at those very granularity in the risk communication aspect. And that's maybe the one of the reason that often you will see the risk or warning system has been failed because community didn't receive the information, or community may receive but didn't actually didn't do any action. We also try to establish and similar activities we try to implement right now in Fiji, which is working quite well. As you can see, for Fiji, we established the cyclone as well as tsunami early warning system in 2017 and 2019. And from there on, actually, the casualty drastically actually reduced in the country. A similar kind of project we established in Solomon Island, Fiji, Tonga, as well as Samoa. They are actually quite working well. Now we are trying to working more towards how actually we can combine overall actually weather and climate into one single platform so that we can understand our transitional risk as well as physical risk. And then from there on, we actually enable some sort of loss modeling or at least financial implication. And then based on that, we can develop some sort of climate mitigation as well as adaptation measures for our community. An example here is a drought early warning system. As you can see, often actually we try to look at more drought or seasonal forecasting in one single parameter, but there are actually a lot of systems that play around in the Pacific, and how actually we try to combine those climate indices, drought indices, as well as hydrometeorological variable to combine and create a sort of differential modeling using either regression or time series or ensemble to generate some sort of more accurate or more reliable information for our agro industry or other differential sectors. Here is an example that we set up a flood early warning system recently for Honiara, where they try to look at more on the regional aspect based on the weather forecasting to generate some flash flood as well as urban flooding aspect. And then once they understand the weather phenomena for next 3 to 7 days, that trigger to a more hydrological or river level forecasting system. And that also triggered to a community-based early warning system where they have a small gauge, automatic gauge actually, if that cross any particular threshold, that they start allowing alert to the community level. And another example here in New Zealand on how actually the long range forecasting and how you can actually dealing with uncertainty. Obviously, as I said, that when you go more lead time, it actually reduces your accuracy level, but you can actually take differential decision, either a strategical decision planning or tactical action, or even an application based on the differential lead time forecasting. An impact-based forecasting example, this is from Tonga, where we try to generate for various weather as well as extreme weather as well as differential hazard forecasting, and how that could create an impact for various sectors like airport authority, telco authority, or port authority. And as you can see, the sector has that differential risk ranking and then differential impact. So we actually need to provide them more customized information for their decision-making process. And then finally, just an example that also you need to go through a lot of capacity building as well as awareness programs through we called one of the programs here in New Zealand is Get Ready, Get Through, which is using a 4R principle, how actually you make sure that people are actually have enough preparation and simulation exercise and as well as understanding about the risks, so that actually they can actually take some appropriate action when the time comes. I think that's basically all from my presentation, and I really thank you so much for joining today. And it's been a pleasure to join with my old fellow as well as alumni after a long time. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bapon. Fakhruddin, thank you for that very insightful discussion on need for early warning system. I think as we see more and more climate change happening, I think this issue of loss and damage also discussed a lot during COP26 in Glasgow. I think all these things really ties up that we need to build a capacity in order to address some of the loss and damage which will happen in the future from the climate change, but also, of course, there are some other dimensions, non-climate change related disaster risk also. I think with that, I think in the interest of time, may I suggest, Chair, that we go back to maybe our plenary session and maybe take up more questions there.
Okay. You may now leave the room, and then you will be actually taken to the main room. See you in a while. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I believe Professor Datta and Professor Hussain are at time zone where it is 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. respectively. So our special thanks on behalf of the AIT Alumni Association for their time in joining in those very godly hours. We have 3 distinguished presenters. The first presenter, whose presentation will be played live, the recorded one, is from Professor Saadat Hussain. He is a civil engineer and geotechnical engineering graduate from the AIT in 1997 and PhD from the North Carolina State University. And having spent a significant amount of time in both academia and industry, he's currently a professor of civil engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington, and also the director, most importantly, Solid Waste Institute for Sustainability. So may I request Ms. Wynn to play his presentation, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity for me to talk about roadmap for sustainable waste management. And today I will present what is the current state of waste management globally and what can be done. You know, waste management is an issue that has always been in the back burner for most of the societies. If you look at the urbanization, you know, with urbanization, you know, population is being shifting from rural area to the urban area. Along the process, transportation system went from car-driven car to the rail line to the super speed train. But the waste management in most of the part of the world, what was back in 1950, now in 2020, there has not been much changes. But if we want a sustainable city, sustainable urban city, sustainable place to live, and safe and environmentally healthy place, we need to make waste management a priority. We cannot be using the system that had been used in 40, 50 years ago. What else is happening during urbanization? You know, if we look at this, you know, this is a photo of Dubai between 1990 and 2013. A lot of development. Kuala Lumpur, Korea, you cannot even imagine the Seoul, how Seoul changed in 50 years. Shanghai. With this, you know, rural area became urban area, a lot of building and infrastructure came in the picture, many office space come in the picture. As a waste management professional, what I'm looking at, that there is a lot of waste generated between these two time periods, additional waste. Why? With urbanization, people's economic wealth increases, its standard of living increases, consumption increases. What is the final product? Waste generation increases significantly. If you look at the projected waste generation by region, this is a data from World Bank. Low income and middle income countries in next 30 years, waste management, waste, generated waste is going to be triple and double. Not much in upper and middle income or high income countries. Now, if the waste generation increases this way, are we managing the waste in a way that will be healthy and sustainable? With all this increased waste generation, we were hit by COVID, you know, last year. And because of COVID, waste generation increased significantly, and one sector increased more than other is the basically medical waste. And along with the medical waste, if you look at these photos, that everything you can see in the photo, there is plastic, plastic, and plastic. The world was trying to get away from plastic, and everywhere we're talking about plastic, recycling and plastic. But COVID brought back all the things that were banned, like single-use plastic bag were banned, you know, before the COVID. During the COVID, there was an idea that on the surface of plastic, COVID, you know, the virus can stay there up to 72 hours. So what happened? Everybody went back to, you know, using more plastic, you know, during the COVID period. So if we look at this, since 1950, 6.3 billion tons of plastics were, you know, produced. 91% of them were never recycled. So before COVID hit, everybody was trying to get rid of one-time use plastic bag and plastics, but after COVID hit, plastic generation and use increased significantly. Not only that, we know mask and hand gloves, increased use of mask and hand gloves all over the world now. Now, if you go to the beaches, in last 1.5 years, there are a lot of mask and hand gloves all over the beaches. So before COVID hit, we had issues with the waste. Now with COVID, we are in more trouble. And so we need to make sure that we are managing it right. One of the main issue, we are generating more waste, but what about the collection? If you look at this, lower middle income and middle income countries average, the collection is less than 50%. If it is less than 50% collected, what happens to the rest of the 50% that we are not collecting? It ends up in, uncollected waste causes air pollution, flooding, public health disasters. Look at this. This was a one time, this is a photo from Bangladesh, Dhaka. This was a small water channel. People, you could not go from one side to another. This is water channel. Now that for complete water channel is completely filled with garbage. You can walk from one side to another side. Around that area, there are a lot of dengue fever. There are a lot of mosquitoes. This is a breeding ground for all kind of disease. Uncollected garbage also end up in drainage system. And with that, what is happening, in Dhaka city and some other cities where the cities are not under the water level, but during the rainy season, because this plastic bag gets into the drainage system, drain is clogged, they will see flooding immediately during the rain and immediately 1-2 days after the rain. That causes not only the problem for the city commuters, it causes a lot of health issue for everybody around that neighborhood. So we need to make sure, when we're talking about waste management, our waste collection becomes one of the major issues, which is neglected or is not paid attention to. Now, globally, how the waste is managed. This is theory that we should have source separation, recycling, energy recovery, and last option is treatment and disposal. But if you look at the data from global picture, 70% is dump site or sanitary landfill, which was supposed to be the least preferred choice, which is mostly used around the world. Waste to energy is only 11%, 19% is mechanical treatment and composting. Now, with the open dumping, there is one major issue, COP26, and many people discussed about it, open burning. Whenever you are burning the trash in an open dump site, you are creating a lot of issues for the air pollution and everything else. Health hazard. This is a very, very serious health hazard. So we cannot manage our waste this way. Another issue with dump site, there is no bottom liner system in the dump site. So when there is leachate generated, it goes to the nearby water body and it creates a huge problem for everybody. Look at this open dump site. Because of the operational issue, the dump site was completely full by 2017 and they kept operating on it. This started the operation 50 years ago. The dump site failed in 2017. It cost more than 150 people's life. So issue is, dump site and landfills are easy to operate. People are familiar with it. Is it the best system? No. Can we live with it? No. Do we need to change? Yes. But the change is not going to be easy. Because dump site and landfill, are very expensive. In a way, you need a lot of land. Every 20-25 years, you need land for landfill. But people are shifting from rural area to cities. Cities are becoming mega cities. So when a city doesn't have enough space for the people to live, how you can find space in every 20-25 years? So we need to come up with a solution that this land issue can be solved. Okay, one of the solutions that developed world uses is waste to energy and other technology that can be used in the developing country if they're appropriate for their generated waste. What do I mean by that? In low-income countries, you have more than 60 to 80% organic waste, and most of the time they're food waste generated in kitchen and our markets. On the other hand, in high-income countries, you have high amount of plastic paper. So if you burn the high-income countries' waste, you have enough caloric value that you get enough energy out of it. When you go to the low-income countries, including many countries in South Asia and Africa, their moisture content sometimes is 60 to 80%. So when you're trying to burn those trash or garbage for waste generation, as if you are burning liquid, and hoping that you get a lot of energy out of it. If you look at the World Bank data, you need more than 6,500 BTU per kg for it to be viable for waste to energy generation. None of those countries has waste characteristic that will give you more than 3,000 BTU energy value. So why still many countries are trying to use it? Because I think maybe they don't know the technology, maybe they're not familiar that this waste characteristics is a major decision-making tool, and for finding out which technology that we can use. Now, there is another thing that I want to mention. During the COVID, I don't know where is the source, but in the beginning, in Wuhan, China, they had 5 major, waste to energy plant. They releases a lot of cancer-causing dioxin and furans. They are also major source of particulate matter, tiny particles of dust. Both of these materials can get into people's lung very easily and causes, heart disease, breathing trouble, and diabetes. All of these are also, the pre-existing disease that affects the COVID virus, the people who get affected by COVID virus more than others. There is also another study by T.S. Chan School of Public Health in Harvard, that if you have 1 microgram per cubic meter more PM2.5 in the air, the death they found in that area was 15% more. Look at this. There are some, of this waste to energy plant very next to the neighborhood. And a lot of people died in Europe in the beginning. Early days of COVID, if you look at this map, this is the number of cases, this is the places where you have more waste to energy in USA. Look at the number of deaths. This simply overlaps. Where you have more waste to energy plant, more people around there living there are, in general, low income population, and most people died in those areas in the beginning. So if there is no way you can say, there is no effect of this waste to energy plant on the people's health, which, releases a lot of dioxin and cancer causing equipment and PM2.5. All this increases the possibility of COVID death. So considering everything, we have now wrote a book on waste crisis, which is basically, gives you the roadmap for sustainable waste management. This was the previous method, old dump site sanitary landfill, but we are going for sustainable waste management or perpetual landfill concept. This is here, we have collection, processing, and waste to energy generation or landfill gas to energy generation. But one thing that we propose new here, that we come up with a system facility which is called Sustainable Material and Resource Treatment Facility. One location, all the trash comes here, you sort the waste here. After sorting them, you recycle the material, or you use the organic waste for compost facility. Everything, after doing everything, if anything is left over, it goes to the biocell. Biocell is basically a previously operated landfill, kind of like that, but we operate it in a way that all the decomposition will be completed within 10 to 15 years. And we operate it in a way that we keep reusing the space again and again. That means we will never require, once we have a facility, we'll never require a landfill or biocell space for another 50 to 100 years. So this solves the major issue of people are looking for landfill space every 20 years. And there is always issue because they cannot find the space. So this solves the major crisis of, that they need more space for the landfill operation, but we are not doing landfill operation anymore. This is a smart facility where the facility will operate for 100 to 150 years. Okay. Now, another benefit of this system, that what about recycling? Remember, if we recycle something and don't use them, there is no use of recycling. We need to make product out of recycled product. And in Texas, out of a plastic bottle, there is some company making recycled plastic pin, and we are using for civil engineering infrastructure project, and we are using for fixing the highway slope. This is one of the case study that we presented in many places. Now, I don't have the time for video, but I'll send the link. We also, I also very strongly believe that if we have a system and if we only know, if we don't transfer the technology to other countries, the technology has no value. So ISWA and SWIS combined together, we have a winter school going on for last 5 years, except last year because of COVID, we canceled. We brought people from 85 different countries, show them how to operate a sustainable waste management system, and they went back to their countries and they're implementing some of this idea they learned from here. Okay, thank you very much. I also want to mention that ISWA, International Solid Waste Association, awarded SWIS, Solid Waste Institute of Sustainability, the award, for one of the best training center and one of the best research center in the world. Okay, I hope this presentation will be helpful. If in case you have any question, please let me know, and I will try to address them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hussain, for your recorded presentation. It certainly has been extremely stimulating and thought-provoking. We'll come to the Q&A in the next session, which will be the merged session of session 1A and session 1B. We now move directly to the next presentation, the recorded one, by Professor Animesh Datta. He is a professor and director of the Biorenewable Innovation Laboratory, the School of Engineering at Guelph University in Ontario, Canada. Professor Datta has first degree from Drought in Bangladesh. Then in 98, he had his Energy Technology Division's Master of Engineering degree from the AITAA, and subsequently his PhD from the Dalhousie University. He worked there. He also lectured at the AITAA, and he's currently a full professor at the University of Guelph. So please join me in welcoming Professor Datta, and particularly his recorded presentation, which will follow now.
Good morning, everyone. This is Animesh Datta. It's my pleasure to be here today, and very welcome from Canada. It is very early in the morning. Today, I'll be talking about from waste to wealth, an integrated, tunable, and circular economy approach for bio-waste valorization. Currently, I am serving as a professor and director of Biorenewable Innovation Lab of School of Engineering and University of Guelph. In terms of my education and my relationship with Asian Institute of Technology, I got my master's back in 1998 from Energy Technology, Asian Institute of Technology, as well as I was an assistant professor from 2005 to 2007 of energy program before I moved back to Canada again. Currently, I am the professor and director of Biorenewable Innovation Lab at University of Guelph, and my research interest mainly on clean energy and sustainable energy development, mainly on waste or bio-waste conversion to bioenergy, biofuel, and biochemicals. In terms of my accomplishment, some of those research has been gone to industry, developing an innovative novel technology on waste conversion, as well as heat transfer aspect of this advanced energy system, and hydrothermal carbonization, which will be the main topics to this presentation. Canada is a big country, and University of Guelph located near Toronto, just 1 hour drive from both Niagara Falls and Toronto. And this is one of the institute that's recommended for overall learning and student support, as well as one of the top school in agricultural science. And given the fact that agriculture is most of the important aspect, and university recognize 3 important global issues. One of is global warming or climate change, that's what we're talking today, as well as energy sustainability and food and water security. And it was realized that sustainable biomass can aspect and contribute towards all those 3 aspects. In the terms of biomass conversion, university has decided to start building 2 facility. One is analytical laboratory and one is research pilot plant study facility. as well as university has a facility for plant-based or farm-based energy system accomplishment. So the types of research that Biorenewable Innovation Lab has been conducting is mainly on thermochemical conversion and biochemical conversion processes. And it was realized that waste is a resource. Actually, it's not a waste, just waiting for an opportunity for various conversion. And all those conversion is complement with life cycle analysis as well as cost analysis. So when we talk about the waste and biomass, we realize it is a carbon neutral and especially waste also, and it creates energy security. But the main technical barriers are their low energy and low bulk density, high moisture content, their fiber difficult to grind, and has a high alkali matter. So the research question that come to the point, so how can we produce an industrial grade biocarbon or biomaterials with very low alkali metal, higher heating value, and high grindability chemicals from these low quality bio-waste resources? So the typical solution currently people are using is a torrefaction, which is just simple heating at low temperature, mild pyrolysis, and able to contribute some of those challenges. For example, can produce high density air fuel, no biocontamination, and hydrophobic materials at the end. So what it does actually, it brings back biomass here from the point to, especially in the lignite stage. For example, as can be seen from here, the biomass here, and by removing the oxygen content, one can bring it back to peat or lignite stage. The problem still is that a higher energy demand for the wet biomass, especially if it is has a lot of moisture, because one needs to remove all those moisture from the biomass itself or waste, and that needs a lot of latent heat of energy. Also, lots of biomass often come up with high ash content that has a high potassium and sodium and alkali metal that contribute to the agglomeration, so torrefaction cannot remove it. In that context, hydrothermal carbonization, which is a techniques that biomass is treated in hot compressed air instead of drying, can make a big instant. Especially what it does, instead of heating it and removing it, cook under water like as a pressure cooker, and that is separates the solid material from the other part and deposit it as a hydrochar. So the current conversion technology and hydrothermal conversion technology, if we want to differentiate themselves, so in terms of moisture content, because hydrothermal has a positive response because it's quick underwater, and is also able to remove alkali metal by removing the ash content and alkali by leaching it, and also because heat transfer coefficient in water is very high, so cooking is take much faster, and energy intensity is one of the things that need to be investigated. But in terms of operation, conventional system has been operating over the years, so it's pretty easy to use it. However, hydrothermal conversion, where feeding of biomass is against pressure, could be a challenge and needs to investigate. So in terms of energy, if we look into that, this is a recent paper published in Energy Institute, Journal of Energy Institute. As can be seen from here, if we have a continuous hydrothermal carbonization process where you have a heat recovery, so when a biomass or waste have a moisture content of what 22%, and hydrothermal could be an issue, could be positive. This is one of the things that most of the biomass has more than 50% moisture content, so hydrothermal may take a big role in that conversion. So on that context, biocarbon development research leads into development of variety of waste biomass, especially from woody biomass to tomato vines and wet biomass, municipal and agricultural waste, able to produce carbon, which we can call it hydrothermal carbon, and that carbon further graded to biocarbon for soil amendment, biocarbon for heat and power production, and for charcoal in material application, as well as activated carbon for waste water treatment and energy storage. So if you look into that, some of those solutions, we can say that a wide variety of biomass and organic waste can be processed for biocarbon with desired quality. We also have started to see their heating value and energy density, as well as durability. And the red one, as you can see, that HTC at 260 at 5-minute processing time, able to produce a biocarbon with about 26 megajoule and had an energy density of 27 gigajoule per meter cube, which is similar to that of bituminous coal. And also it has a durability of nearly 95%. So this research is published in Applied Energy Journal. So that can show that lead carbon has a pretty high potential over torrefaction, as can be seen. It has a much lower heating value and lower energy density. So what it does comparable to this to the chart. So hydrothermal carbonization able to bring back when you have about 260-degree somewhat air bituminous coal, as can be seen from this band carbon diagram. Whereas for torrefaction process, they are still in the peat or lignite stage. So this can conclude that existing coal-based infrastructure can be used for this kind of biomass conversion process. This also look into the alkali content within the ash, and it can be seen that most of the alkali metals such as potassium, sodium can be reduced from about 60 to 80% from the parent biomass. So then that is a very important aspect. So one can conclude that HTC processing significantly improve fuel quality and properties of agricultural biomass by removing most of the barriers that inhibits its wider application. We look into that, then we produce this hydrothermal carbonization. It also produces this liquid or processed water. Now, what can we do with this processed water? So what we did, we look into the processed water itself and try to characterize it, and we found that it has contained a lot of acetic acid, lubinic acid, and also some sort of organic carbon. And as we know that this kind of wastewater can be pre-processed with anaerobic digestion, wherein anaerobic digestion hydrolysis is one of the main rate limiting steps. So if we are able to integrate this hydrothermal carbonation process water with anaerobic digestion process, then hydrolysis will be enhanced, and then one can expect more gas yield. So the topic is probably hydrothermal processing has the potential to be integrated with anaerobic digestion to enhance gas yield and co-processing of organic waste. So these all leads to development a complete circular economy approach for a farm. So this slide will talk about an example for a farm based, especially on the corn residue, what one can do looking into the circular economy approach. So what we did here, the corn residue first hydrothermally converted, and then the biocarbon has a potential for various applications for CHP power, for example, combined heat and power or heating. And the liquid processed water can be go to anaerobic digestion, produce a biogas, and the leachate can see that has a nutrient recovery of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur at the percentage shown. So this paper has been published in Energy Journal, and that shows an overall energy recovery of 79%. So based on this approach, an approach is proposed for a community here in Canada, especially when one have this lignocellulose biomass can be used in the hydrothermal reactor and produce the hydrochar. That hydrochar can be used for the combined heat and power. That can be used for remote community or greenhouse application. On the other hand, the liquid water can be used for anaerobic digestion, further produce the biogas for the greenhouse heating or community, and the community will generate the food waste and energy crop that's further can be processed to hydrothermal reactor. So in a way, it can be able to circulate the whole resources, especially for a rural or remote community. Further, we wanted to develop a value from this hydrocarbon. So the example will show that how can we do the high value activated carbon. So what we do it here, we use again corn grains that produce the corn wheat distillation fiber, especially in Ontario. Ethanol is a big industry, and they produce a lot of corn fiber currently used for animal feeding or some just waste. So we use that as a resource and did a study on hydrothermal carbonation followed by a chemical activation and dehydration activation. And the research shows that this has a very high value potential, especially produce high value porous thermally stable activated carbon surface area over 1,000 meter square per gram. And that has a pretty high potential, especially for removing heavy metal or water filtration, gas storage, supercapacitor, and many more. And this research is published recently in 29 SES Omega Journal. And we also look into another area of iron and steel industry, because iron and steel industry using a lot of coal, and their CO2 emission is one of the highest per unit production of iron and steel. So we try to reduce this. So this work has been with ArcelorMittal Group of Canada. So we look into agriculture biomass, something like raw sewage gas that has a very high ash content. So we first try to torrefy it, but we found that the ash content is actually increased for the torrefaction process from, as can be seen, from 4.45 to 7.12. Then we first introduce the hydrothermal conversion process, and that hydrothermal conversion process reduce the ash content, and the product further converted to active biocarbon through a slow pyrolysis process at a higher temperature, and that able to produce a biocarbon which is similar to the PCI coal, that can be seen in terms of carbon, in terms of heating value, and ash is further reduced fairly heavily, because one of the problem with the PCI coal, it cannot tolerate a special iron intensity alkali metal having in the coal. So we are able to remove that, and the process shows that initially it's mostly a leaching process, which is a hydrothermal carbonization processing, and able to reduce lots of the alkali, and then further we investigated and with a slow pyrolysis and able to produce a desired quality of biocarbon. Based on that, we propose this scenario, overall approach of closed loop scenario, that able to produce PCI coal type quality carbon from the agricultural biomass or any kind of waste biomass that is the highest content, removing all the barriers, and will be able to integrate HTC process with slow pyrolysis, and that able to replace fossil carbon in blast furnace, as well as reduce greenhouse emission. So that leads to the technical progression, because we talk about hydrothermal carbonization is a challenging one, because feeding biomass against pressure is a challenge. So what we did, we developed a bench scale, a pilot scale continuous process, and we try to study the quality of carbon, and we found that even with continuous approach, the carbon quality is better than the batch quality carbon. And based on this concept, we develop a innovative conceptual design, which is under commissioning. It is a 50 kJ per hour hydrothermal carbonization reactor. So in conclusions, we can say that we are able to pre-process greenhouse residues, energy crop residue, municipal green beans processing waste through hydrothermal processing. As can be seen that this is the key hydrothermal carbonization that are able to produce a hydroshell that can be further converted into biocoke or activated carbon for water treatment, or coal for the CHP power, or electrolysis for the battery as energy storage, or can be used as a catalyst biosynthesis for catalytic activity. The liquid can be again converted through anaerobic digestion to produce biogas.
Will gradually come. We still have one more presentation after Professor Datta's recorded one. Can we play the recorded presentation of Professor Datta from where we left? It was the conclusion slide, right at the end.
Able to pre-process greenhouse residues, energy crop residue, municipal green beans processing waste through hydrothermal processing. As can be seen that this is the key hydrothermal carbonization that are able to produce a hydrocell that can be further converted into biocoke or activated carbon for water treatment, or coal for the CHP power, or electrolysis for the battery as energy storage, or can be used as a catalyst biosynthesis for catalytic activity. The liquid can be again converted through anaerobic digestion to produce biogas, and by cleaning can be used for the biomethane, and the digested can be used for the fertilizer. So that leads to a kind of leading to zero waste solution. So we can say that hydrothermal carbonation products from low quality agri-food residue can be potential and new value chain. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I would like to thank you, my whole BRIL team, and acknowledge the research support that I have received from all those supporting agencies. Now, if you have any question, thank you. I will wait for that. Thank you very much, and have a very good day. Bye.
Okay, then. Thanks, Professor Datta, for your nice and exciting presentation on the utilization of waste biomass. We now move to the next presentation, the last one of this session, from Dr. Priyantha Vijayatunga. This is a completely different type of presentation from the first one on waste management and the second one on waste biomass. Dr. Vijayatunga is currently the chief of the Energy Sector Group, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the Asian Development Bank. He is a professional electrical engineer, and having worked significant amount of time in both academia and now in the multilateral development institutions, he brings in a completely different perspective on the energy sector financing. Let me also tell the audience that Dr. Vijayatunga holds a PhD and diploma from the Imperial College in London on power system economics. So if we can play Dr. Vijayatunga's presentation, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are joining from. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me for this first global symposium on sustainable technology innovations with social impact in agriculture, environment, and digital transformation on the occasion of AITAA's 50th Governing Board meeting and global reunion. My presentation is going to touch on the future energy sector financing, a multilateral development bank's perspective. From the viewpoint of Asian Development Bank, how we are going to look at future energy sector financing, which is obviously a very relevant topic in terms of sustainable development agenda, which we are now pursuing all over the world. With that, a small introduction, let me now switch to my presentation. As I indicated, this is going to be my presentation title, and let me move on. Net zero carbon emissions is part of this whole future energy planning, future energy scenario. So as you know, we just concluded COP26, and we have now pledges to achieve net zero emissions from about 130 countries by 2050. And China 2060, India 2070, and Russia 2060. And but these pledges, important thing is these pledges by the government to date may not be adequate to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which is a requirement if you are going to achieve 1.5 degree target by the end of the century. Current trend, if it goes as in unabated, it will end up with more than 2-degree rise in temperature and even more by 2100. And as International Energy Agency has indicated, the path to net zero emissions is very narrow, and it requires large-scale deployment of clean energy technologies now, and things like electric vehicle adoption very much now itself, and building retrofits with energy efficient equipment. And it also estimates it is almost equivalent to having a large solar power park, what we have now today, every day in the future. What does this mean? With this to net zero emissions by 2050. This means, as I indicated, we have to exponentially expand our clean energy investments, about $4 trillion by 2030. And this means in terms of solar and wind energy adoption, 630 gigawatts by 2030 solar, and then wind almost 300 gigawatts. This is an enormous task. And then clean transport. In terms of electric vehicle sales, now it's only about 5% of the world car sales, vehicle sales today, and it will have to jump to about 60% by 2030. Energy efficiency. Electricity or energy intensity in economy should improve by 4% every year. And if you look at the enormity of the task, by 2030, the overall economy of the world, global economy, should grow by about 40% from now. But the energy use should go down by 7% compared to today. So you can see how decoupling of energy is important when it comes to economic growth. Of course, there are benefits of low carbon growth. It's not just bringing down GHG emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, but it will eventually help to increase clean energy investments and associated jobs and growth in the economies. We will create about millions and millions of jobs, particularly in the local populations, and significant lift in global economic growth. Again, local economies will benefit, and achieve universal access to electricity in these efforts, helping the rural and the poor. And clean cooking worldwide by 2030 means health of women and children will improve, because the improvement in indoor air quality. Innovation is very much required because only part of the technologies exist today will help us to take to 2050 net zero emissions. You need to have new technologies which are already in pilot scale or demonstration phase, and we need to put in efforts to bring this to commercial scale, which means innovation is very important. Research and development is very, very important. That's where institutions like AITAA play a major role. And we have to shift away from fossil fuels naturally, huge declines in the use of coal, oil, and gas. That means there will be negative impacts on the populations connected to such developments in the past. So that's one thing we have to look at. So we need to have a just transition. And this requires sales of internal combustion engines to stop by 2035, and coal and oil power plants phased out completely by 2040. You can see the enormity of the task ahead. And then the immediate stop to development of oil fields and gas fields, and no extensions to coal mines. So you can see how much we have to move away from fossil fuels within the next 10 to 20 years. And in all these exercises, people are at the center, and multiple impacts on people's lives. As I said, transport, heating, cooking, all impacting people's lives, and urban planning and jobs, and 30 million jobs created, as I said, because of these new interventions, new technologies, new industries. At the same time, obviously, 5 million jobs lost. These are estimates from International Energy Agency because of the traditional areas of energy systems going away, going out of the system. And consumer choices, interestingly, will lead to about 55% of the cumulative emission reductions. So that means you and I will have a huge role to play here. When we decide on what we are going to buy in terms of our transport, Purchasing an electric vehicles can make a big change. Retrofitting a house with energy efficient technologies, efficient lighting, efficient air conditioning, efficient refrigerators, all this will have an impact on emission reductions. And our behavioral changes when we need to move, whether we are going to go by car or public transport or cycle, will eventually decide how much of emission reductions we can achieve. And interestingly, in this whole exercise, electricity will be at the center. So by 2040, electricity will have to play a major role in final energy consumption, both in all sectors like transport, industries, commercial enterprises, households, everywhere electricity will play a major role. And supplying almost half of the total energy consumption by 2040. And this means the electricity industry requires huge flexibility. Batteries, demand response, hydrogen-based fuels, hydropower, and then obviously all the smart technologies to absorb more and more renewable energies into the system. From Asian Development Bank, we have recently approved 2021 energy policy, and it recognizes the central role of energy, when it comes to overall socio-economic development. Primary objective is focused on our developing member countries to accelerate the development of sustainable and resilient energy systems that provide reliable and affordable access to all and foster inclusive economic growth and support low carbon transition. And obviously this 2021 energy policy is a result of the accelerated change in the energy landscape, falling cost of renewable energies, and then emergence of new technologies, low carbon technologies, and cost effective those technologies. And then global commitments like Sustainable Development Goals, and then Paris Agreement, which came in 2015. And of course, the whatever agreements coming after this COP26. Then of course, our own strategy 2030 came out a couple of years ago, and that needs to be reflected in the new energy policy. So if you look at the energy policy principles as it stands now, which was just approved last month, and there are 5 principles, supports efforts to bring affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy to all, to eradicate poverty and reduce social inequalities. Then of course, tackle climate change, which is equally important. That's policy principle 2. Then the third one is development of the institutions and financial sustainability of these utilities and the sector institutions, good governance, and private sector participation. These are all important aspects of energy sector development in the right direction. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve the targets what we are planning to achieve. And the fourth one is regional cooperation. As all of us know, more cooperation, the better it's going to be. More regional cooperation, the more optimal the energy systems are going to be. So regional cooperation and integration is very critical, not only in terms of sharing knowledge and experiences, but also sharing the infrastructure services, the generation, the transmission services, and so on and so forth. And not only that, the last policy principle, the fifth one, is combining finance, knowledge, partnerships, and country-focused approach. These are all important when you put together as a single, exercise. They cannot operate in silos, and they cannot be separately looked at. All these will have to be combined to give the right kind of solutions. What are the salient features of this energy policy? I don't have to go into details. It's clean energy investments. Then strategic decarbonization, phasing out of coal is very critical, and then increasing resilience in the energy infrastructure. Then in new technologies, emerging technologies like carbon capture and storage, and then biofuels, etc., etc. And then the other important thing is that we are looking at the DMCs phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, which is very important if you want to get out of this cycle of more and more GHG emissions from these sectors, and then bringing in social cost of carbon into our analysis of projects. That's very important, so that the ones which low carbon interventions are get the right kind of benefit that they should get. Salient features: we will not support any midstream or upstream oil projects. We will not support any coal facilities or new coal-fired generation. No nuclear energy is supported, as we used to anyway, even in the previous policy. no support for gas exploration and drilling activities. But we will be selectively supporting midstream and downstream natural gas projects because of the energy access requirements, and being a transitional fuel, gas will have a role to play. And then oil-fired generation in specific circumstances where there is no other alternative, economic and affordable alternative. Large hydropower will have to will play a major role in climate change, addressing climate change challenges. But at the same time, we have to be very careful when it comes to safeguard requirements. On top of that, the ADB is committed to align our operations to Paris Agreement, and all our souring operations are expected to be fully aligned by 2023, and non-souring operations fully aligned by 2025. And we have already announced enhancement of investments in adaptation and resilience, and to overall climate financing to go up 100 billion by 2030. And in fact, in the period 2019 to 2024, the adaptation financing to double to $9 billion. And at the same time, as I said, we have introduced, we have put out, announced the energy transition mechanism in COP26, which will be vigorously pursued for acceleration of retirement of coal power plants. And few final remarks. And as all of us know, developing countries had minimal contribution to past carbon dioxide emissions. However, they suffer most. Our countries suffer most. Therefore, together we have an important role to play, and we need to confront this challenge together. ADB will continue to play a major role, as in the case of other multilateral development banks in the energy sector development in the region. And the focus will shift away. Our focus shift away from traditional areas to new areas. We will support new and innovative technologies and approaches to take over gradually. And then souring financing will be very carefully used to maximize leveraging non-souring financing or private sector investments. And obviously, we will increase knowledge contribution in the region to share experiences, pilot new technologies, business models, and support adoption. All these efforts will eventually help low carbon energy sector growth in the region, eventually helping sustainable development, and also expected net zero emissions by 2050, and to contain our temperature rise to 1.5 degree target by the end of the century. With that note, let me stop here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for bearing with me these few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Wijayatunga, for alluding to us the enormity of the challenge, not just in terms of financing, but also in terms of the resources that will be required if the whole world, including the developing and the developed world, does need to and will need to move to a clean energy path. So with that, let me join on behalf of, please join me on behalf of the Alumni Association in thanking all the three presenters. I think these have been extremely thought-provoking. I'm pretty sure you have lots of questions in your mind to all the three presenters. Please join us now to the main session, where you will have the opportunity to ask the presenters your questions directly, either through the chat box or by other means. Let's see. So please let us join the main session.
Please don't leave the meeting. You may leave the room. Don't leave the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Shabendranath.
Yes. Please rejoin the main room. Thank you.
So
don't press the button, leave the meeting.
Okay.
Leave the room. Decided to extend the time by about half an hour, 20 to 30 minutes.
They're all here.
AIT Extension has agreed, I suppose. The AIT Vietnam Day will commence at 5 o'clock parallelly. So those who want to join the AIT Vietnam Day, Teachers Day, they can do so using that link. But I think we need to do justice to this very So many people have taken the trouble to make presentations. We are giving enough time. Over to you, Alvin.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shavi. Welcome back to this plenary session. We have two distinguished panel of discussants, and I may now introduce them. The first panelist is Professor Chettiyapan Viswanathan. He's a professor of the Department of Energy, Environment, and Climate Change, School of Environment, Resources and Development of the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. He lectures in Environmental Engineering and Management program. His research and teaching interests into solid liquid separation technologies for water and wastewater treatment, desalination and membrane technology, solid waste management, the waste reduce, reuse and recycle, dry anaerobic digestion, waste minimization and waste auditing, wastewater reuse, clean technologies, environmental technology assessment, industrial pollution control. Professor Viswanathan has been awarded the International Conference on Solid Waste Management and Circular Economy, Lifetime Achievement Award for 2020 as part of the 10th International Conference on Sustainable Waste Management towards Circular Economy, held in Jaipur University, Kolkata, India. He will be joined with another panelist, Professor Brahmanand Mohanty. He's an independent expert in sustainable energy. He has been serving the French Agency for Ecological Transition as its regional advisor for Asia since 1991. He was a faculty in energy in the School of Environment, Resources and Development at the Asian Institute of Technology from 1986 to 2020. He has undertaken professional missions during the last 3 decades for bilateral and multilateral development agencies in Asia, as well as in the Middle East, Africa, and Mediterranean countries. He obtained his doctorate in energy from the Institut National Polytechnique in Toulouse, France in 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, for this panel of session, although we have cut around 30 minutes, we are most welcome to have our panelists, Professor Chettiyapan and Dr. Mohanty. Professor Chettiyapan, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me take the next 5 minutes and quickly sort of give my views on waste management sector. On the session 1B on the waste management sector, we had 3 interesting presentations. The first one was on roadmap for sustainable waste management. Second one, it's a very interesting presentation where Professor Animesh Datta talked about it, waste to wealth, and especially it took an example of a biomass related issue, how we have to move from linear to circular economy. The last one was also very interesting, which shows a presentation about future of energy sector, especially financing aspects, okay, how the multilateral development banks are working on that. Now, let me take the next 5 minutes, talk about what the sustainable waste management. So when you talk about a waste, is basically essentially a wrong substance, a wrong quantity, and a wrong place, and a wrong time. So when the waste was originally looked into an issue from an environmental engineering point of view, we always had a problem. So for example, if you look at a sugar industry, a typical example is in those days, molasses was an issue of waste, but today molasses is the raw material for alcohol production. Same thing for a paper mill. Black liquor used to be a big issue as a waste problem, and today we have black liquor, a caustic recovery almost in all large-scale power plant, paper mills. So in 1960s, when the waste was the term coined, the solution was looked at it, building up effluent standards. Okay, for it could be air pollution or for a wastewater. So once you have these effluent standards, we had technology to build the treatment plant, and that is what AIT's environmental engineering program way back in 1968, training many graduates, including me, on building wastewater treatment plants or air pollution control systems or a solid waste management issues and etc. But all these things were looked at it, building an end of the pipe system from a civil engineering approach. But later onwards, we found this not the best approach. Waste management should not be looked at as an engineering approach, a black box, building installations, which has to be more to do with management. Issues like pollution prevention, cleaner production, and etc. being introduced. And so it might be better before building pollution control systems, we need to understand the waste better and we need to manage it better. Then also we learned in many cases, many of the pollution issues are not only a local problem, it's also a global problem. For example, a classic example could be an air pollution issue, which cannot be looked at a local and national issues, it could be a global issue. Same thing can be talked about plastic waste from one country. It could be another problem of moving into a marine pollution. It's a global issues. And same way, many of the environmental problems, what we thought was a discrete, individualistic problem, it is not true. It is an integrated, multi-sectorial problem. And that is why we had international protocols, ozone layer issues, Kyoto Protocol, and currently ongoing discussion about the climate change, etc. So we moved from there, from a linear approach of building end of the pipe treatment system, and where we thought waste is a problem. And next, we moved in the last 10 years, slowly, progressively, we're moving into waste can be looked into a circular approach, okay? Where it's also very important. Originally, we looked at a waste as a problem. And now we've considered it's possible waste can be a wealth, okay? As the nice presentation from Professor Animesh Datta, and we can look into that. So we looked at waste as a solid waste, wastewater or air pollution, which we call a silo approach. And we moved from a silo approach to a holistic approach, and it is very classic example. One classic example I can tell you, plastic waste can be looked at in many cases as a solid waste problem. But if you do not collect your plastic waste properly, and many of the urban flooding directly link into the plastic waste management. So you see, a solid waste problem can create a drainage and urban flooding. So it is very important, waste has to be looked at into a holistic way. So we are moving slowly from a linear waste management to a circular, okay? So to tell you an example on this, is a very classic example. You eat a banana, the end of the process, in your hand, you're holding a banana skin. And that's a waste problem. Now what to do with the banana skin? But if you have a cow next to you, the banana skin can be a feed material for cow. The cow can take it as a thing, as a food. So all that circular economies is identifying the partner where you could get converted this one. Okay, so now very often we talk about as part of the sustainable development, we are moving into a circular economy, which is not very simplistic one. It consists of a lot of other activities. For example, sometimes people look into that circular economy as a simple 3R approach or waste management. No, it is not. It's much broader, consists of 8 different aspects like design for environment, cleaner production, reverse logistic, industrial ecology, energy efficiency, waste management. Look at it. There's only a waste treatment or waste management is one part of circular economy. And product life cycle extension, using a product as a service and extra. So linear economy approach is relatively very simple. Everybody likes it because it's easy to operate and easy to administrate. But circular economy is much more complex. It involves, okay, much more difficult to manage. What happens is very often today, the circular economy is looked at more like a 3R, that is waste reduction, reuse, or recycle, or waste treatment. I think we need to come out of this and you have to look into that bigger scale. So in the waste, in the circular economy, and today's circular economy, as you see, as part of the sustainable development, we find the circular economy is sort of geared or driven by the recycling industries. So we have built large infrastructures in many countries for recycling. That justifies the circular economy. Please be careful. Recycle doesn't help you to reduce your waste resource consumption. So you have to be very careful about this. We should not build infrastructure, something like a recycling industries, that needs your continuous consumption of resources. It is not sustainable. Let me finish my note on this. We need to take a very careful consideration on the circular economy as part of the sustainable waste management. If you overemphasize on recycling, we might be in real trouble. We might not be, we have to be careful. Many of the so-called circular economy waste management at the moment might not be sustainable. So I would like to say we should not place all our golden eggs into this circular economy basket without understanding all the things. I think I have thrown a lot of issues for discussion. Let's stop at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chetiapan. May we now hear from Dr. Mohanty.
Thank you, Professor Plava.
Yours.
Good day to all of you. The topic of this session is sustainable technology innovation. And we had very interesting presentation from our senior colleagues on issues related to how the countries are preparing. We heard Vietnam. The first presentation was Professor Roy, who gave an overview of at the international level. And she did mention about not just about supply side, but also on the demand side interventions. One of the things that I noted during the sessions was most of the presentation was focusing more on when we talk about reducing our carbon emissions. We are talking about mostly numbers. How do you retain our emissions level so that we can achieve below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. In the recent COP26, we discussed a lot about how different countries will achieve a net zero in 2050, 2060, 2070. These to me look more like a number game. If you go deeper into it, we find, for instance, electricity alone, because most of the time we talk about renewable energy from, let's say, solar, wind, hydro, etc. We are mostly talking about electricity, and not all energy is all electricity. Take, for example, my own country, India. Roughly about 15% of energy that is used in the country is electricity. The rest of the 85%, a lot of it is fossil fuel in the form of oil and coal, but also some of it is bioenergy. This is not electricity, it's thermal energy, particularly in the industrial sector. Transport sector, 98% of the energy goes in the form of fossil fuel, that is oil. So when the Asian Development Bank says that we need to look at more about how do we achieve this from electricity generation point of view, we need to be a little bit more careful, and not everything can be converted to electricity. That means not all our uses can be converted into electricity. So when we talk about technology innovation, I have a few points to make, and already there was one of the participants who started discussion on it. I think we should not put all our eggs on technology basket. It has its own limits, because along with the technology, we do require resources, and we live in a finite world. We can't think about infinite resources. The planet in which is our home is changing. Okay? So rather than relying on techno fixes to the climate emergency that we're facing, maybe we are the ones that need redesigning ourselves, not only the technology aspects. We heard that major infrastructure changes would require to be decarbonized, but that will take time. We're talking about time horizon of 2030, 2040, 2050, etc. Okay? So these will take decades to come into full effect. But perhaps the fastest thing that we can change is our mind itself. Can we think about changing our mind, the way we behave? We heard another very interesting presentation of Dr. Priyanta. He talked about ADB study, which says the consumer choice would help to reduce the emissions by 55%. The cumulative emission reduction can be 55%. So a lot depends on the consumer himself or herself. So let's not forget about that. To quote a famous saying in the US, let's not ask what our planet can do for us in terms of resources, but what we can do for our planet. So let's reverse the trend. Okay? Let's redesign the way we live rather than trying to redesign the planet. We're talking about how to redesign the planet, but we need to change ourselves first, and then only we can really achieve the ultimate goal that we are seeking. Okay? We need to bring about changes in our patterns of behavior, urban planning. Okay? A lot of the energy is used in the urban context. We need to look at how do you plan our cities in a different manner to respond to the climate emergency. And we can adapt to live within the world's means. So we need to find how we see our leaders. Okay? Today, much of our decision making is influenced by what we call the social media influencers. Okay? But we need to reverse that. We need to look at how do you idolize eco warriors. There are many of them. We need to look at how do you approach them. How do you look up on them to make the changes? Okay? Since the time is limited, I will not extend it. I just wanted to throw this. Technology alone cannot fix the things. And to quote Mahatma Gandhi, I've just finished by 2 quotes. The first one is, we need to be the change that we wish to see in the world. And the second one, which is even more important, all of us, we are the privileged lot, whether we live in developed countries or in developing countries. When I say in India, the per capita emission is very, very low, I don't include myself in that because my emissions are much higher comparable to any developed country. So let's not hide behind the poor. Let's accept the fact that we also emit a lot of emissions. So Mahatma Gandhi says, live simply so that others can simply live. So with that, I would end it here and open it for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohanty. Just time check, we're about 19 minutes before we end our session. We are actually joined here with our moderators earlier and our 4 of our speakers. So we are now open for questions and would like first to read the question on the chat box. This could be addressed to any of our speakers as well as even our moderators. One of the biggest problems is managing urban waste in developing countries. Landfill sites are becoming next to impossible to find new places. How best from the financial viewpoint and technology viewpoint would address this important issue towards decarbonizing cities? This is coming from Mr. Ajay. Anyone from the speakers?
I suppose Professor Viso is the right person to answer this.
Thank you very much. I thought there was a presentation exactly on the topic by the first presentation, roadmap for sustainable waste management in developing countries. And it is very important if you're talking about urban waste, especially if you're talking about solid waste. I think it is important we need to move towards circular economy, which focus first part on reducing the waste. Okay, so which we should not, I think as Dr. Mohanty pointed out, we should not depend too much on technology when it comes to an urban waste. It has to come with correct type of financial or regulatory instruments to be adapted so that the waste, you need to identify, we need to reduce waste consumption as a first priority. Then we need to reuse it and we need to recycle it as the last option. I hope I answered this question.
Yeah, but I think let me also make a point in here with a couple of examples. There was a significant problem with the disposal of waste optical fibers. And those were simply disposed of in the developing countries coming out of the so-called developed countries. And there was a solution eventually found, and it is now being commercialized. The optical fibers are a fantastic source of high-value germanium and also high-value pure silica, all remaining inside polymers. So the solution there has been to convert the polymers into oil and then convert that oil into either hydrogen or monomer, depending on how those were built in the first place, and then keep all the germanium, so the highly concentrated germanium and silica for recovery in the normal industries, which treat this silica as well as germanium. So there are technical problems, but there are technical solutions as well. Economics is obviously an issue, but that's where the scientific and the technical community can close hands and come up with the solution.
Professor Shankar.
Yes, please.
Yes, this is Saadat Hussain. You know, I think the presentation that roadmap to sustainable waste management, I just joined after my presentation started. So as Professor Vishwanath said, you know, there is an issue in sustainable waste management in developing countries. There are multiple issues. And landfill, open dumping, whatever we are doing right now, I don't think this is going to work, because all of us know that they have limited time capacity. They can be active for 10, 20, or 30 years. Once the 30-year period is gone, we need to look for new landfill space or dump site space. Getting those space is not easy. So we need to come up with a way that, you know, maybe in one place we can reuse the space. We keep talking about recycling different material, but we can recycle our dump site or open landfill or sanitary system. And we can operate in a place that we will not need anything else in next 20, 30 years. And that's the system that I proposed, and that's the system we used in Texas. Right now, I'm working in Ethiopia, Colombia, and a few other Latin American countries implementing the system. That in one location, a smart facility where we have everything, and we can also reuse the space. That's biocell. Biocell is basically part of landfill system. It's a modified version, but we can reuse the space again and again. Now, I also heard a lot about recycling. You know, recycling is fantastic. Recycling is very good. But since China banned in 2018, recycling materials are piling up all over the world, because everything that was recycled in US or Europe used to go to China. Now there is no market. Recycling is good, but if we cannot come up with a material that it produces out of the recycled material, recycling is not going to help us. For circular economy to work, we need to make sure whatever we are recycling, we are reusing to create some other product that can be used for something else. And we are using recycled plastic for making some pins, which is 4 inch by 4 inch by 10 feet long. Just an example, and it for highway infrastructure, fixing the slope, high roads. And there is also an idea of, you know, plastic road. You know, 3 of my PhD students completed all the testing that need to be done, you know, and one of them is defending next week. How to incorporate plastic, non-recyclable plastic into the bitumen as a replacement of bitumen. And the, you know, potential is tremendous. So all I'm saying, you know, we always talk about circular economy. We need to make sure we go through all the check boxes. And when you're recycling, we need to make sure that no matter what happens, we have to reuse the recyclable material. If we don't reuse the recycled material, at the end, recycled material all goes to the landfill. That's happening in many cities in Texas. That's happening in many cities in Europe. They recycled everything because of China ban. They didn't create a local market. Everything is going back to the landfill. So it doesn't help us. Okay. And another point, you know, I heard all the discussion is that, you know, reaching out to the people, creating awareness. We can have very good technology, we have to go both to the policymakers. They need to know what we are talking about. We also need to reach out to the public. It has to be both ways. Only policymaker cannot make policy and nobody is following them. Only, general public may not know, but if policymaker doesn't implement something, this is not going to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There is a question which came from Dr. Salil in Singapore.
Yes.
And it has been addressed to Dr. Vijayatunga. If I can draw his attention, the question is, I think he was referring to your presentation on the ADB's perspective of not financing certain types of technology. So his question is, the COP26 has some consensus on methane curb and Article 6 carbon tax. Would methane carbon sink curb be a feasible pathway for climate financing? What is ADB's perspective?
It's quite an interesting question. Probably, I don't know whether I understood the question well, but overall, the new energy policy is quite clear that we will not finance fossil fuels to start off with. In that process, if, when extracting coal or things like coal, be it methane and so on, if there is some methane related interventions, naturally we will not support. So any upstream, support for fossil fuels anyway will not come, even for gas, coal, oil, any of these will not be supported. So naturally, ADB financing will therefore be not there for these, financing needs in fossil fuels. Even when it comes to downstream, we are quite clear our financing for natural gas, for instance, will be strictly under certain conditions, and that's also meant for energy access related interventions. Oil, the same story. So all in all, we are moving away from oil, fossil fuel financing. So methane included in that sense. Yeah.
And I see Dr. Salil raised his hand. So,
this is fantastic. My long time seeing my earlier boss, Dr. Priyantha. How are you, sir? Okay, my video is not operative, but actually what I meant was the COP26 didn't have much consensus, but they did have a deal on methane. And methane and carbon, the two, that's where I'm leading to, it is rather a conceptual question. But what I have in mind is methane could be used to burn and use as a clean fuel. But carbon dioxide, it stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So to remove that would be very long term. So, but the oil and gas industry is very much dependent on methane. So how would the financing tweak to have a balance, a fine balance? On one side, you won't like to sort of shoo away the oil and gas sector, which is huge, and also the thermal energy coal sector with carbon capture and storage, which also could be. So that is where I have in mind. But I hope you saw the point here, Dr. Priyantha.
Just before we proceed, just to let everyone know that we can extend up to in another 30 minutes, okay, in this session. Thank you. Professor Dakal, I think, is raising his hand.
Yeah, I think, regarding this issue of methane, I think the question was quite good, because all of our climate change discussions always revolve around CO2 emission. And in a way, methane was kind of in a shadow. So this is very good news that in COP26, now over 100 countries, which represent roughly 50% of the global methane emission, they have now committed to reduce methane emission by around, I think, 30% by 2030. And in the country like Canada and United States, they have pledged to reduce them by almost 75% in particularly oil and gas sector, and that the speaker earlier was talking about. So I think these are really good avenues because methane emission comes from many different places. Of course, the waste, then of course from agriculture paddy field, but also from the livestock and also from oil and gas and some other sectors. So I think this is a very welcome move. But I think the question was that whether some of the financial instruments could be mobilized in order to support methane emission reduction. So my thinking is yes, because we are already investing a lot in international public financing, particularly from the waste management and some of the things from which the methane emission comes. But particularly for oil and gas sector, I see this also as an opportunity. But again, answer from Dr. Priyantha is very important here, because we are saying that we are not going to invest in fossil fuel sector, in days to come. So whether in order to reduce the methane from fossil fuel sector, which helps climate change, whether that investment is sort of worth making or not. So maybe that kind of discussion we need to have in next stage. But I see this as a very, very good development coming out from the COP26 in Glasgow.
Thank you very much, Professor Dakal, on that point. Yes, as far as financing is concerned, we are open to financing even fossil fuel connected things like what you just said, as long as such interventions will not extend the lifetime of the existing facilities. So that's quite clear. In other words, as long as there will be reduction in GHG emissions in some form or the equivalent of GHG emissions, then that's fine. And no direct support for anything which would eventually increase emissions. Yes, thank you.
Please allow me to read a comment from Indonesia again. Very happy to see Professor Mohanty virtually. Fully agree with the tagline, live simply. So life cycle assessment study is needed for the all renewable energy implementation or any new technology or improvement in the field energy. Cradle to grave, to be fair, just my 2 cents. Comment here, a question here from EJ Oja. Science technology are indeed immensely important, and their further advancement could help overcome reducing and removing technical constraints and limitations of issues. Much more important, however, would be to ensure the sense and practice of ethics, as well as good governance, especially in the context of the global South. For instance, we worship rivers, but are often seen unable to turn and even maintain them clear and clean. Clearly, therefore, it would be most essential to look into and materialize achieving these software requirements besides arranging the, besides arranging the hardware kind of matters relating, for example, to technology. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other question? We still have 30 minutes.
Yeah, there is one question from Keshan Samarasinghe. Sorry. I'm not sure who to address it. So would you like to read it, please?
Okay, from Keshan. Thank you so much for the great presentations. We know there are so many circular economy business models, waste treatment technologies, and waste management policies. What are the key activities, policies which could be implemented in developing countries by the governments to promote private sector participation in waste management sector? To our speakers, please. Any of our speakers?
Yeah, can I maybe I like to, yeah, I like to say a few words. Please understand, as I made a presentation, very often circular economy is looked into 3R or waste treatment. I think it's only a small part of circular economy. So I think that is the first thing we need to understand. And yes, it's good to know the private sector get involved. They should be brought into circular economy. But very often when the private sector comes to a circular economy, it's an economy which drives. So to a large extent, it revolves around what we call waste recycling related industries. So somewhere we need to balance, the government should take. We need recycling industries, but also we need to have other activities. For example, designing a product from a production level itself for sustainable, okay, design for sustainability. Looking at cleaner production. So there are other components, or even a product selling as a service. Okay, so that's becoming very important today. So, and again, sometimes it's very good. Developing products in a plastic waste management is a classic example, but technology could be developed. Okay, so it should not be looked only at the end of the cycle. We should look at the whole cycle on different stages, and we need to be a little bit careful. And yes, private sectors are necessary, but it has to be carefully controlled and create a conducive environment. That's very important. Thank you. I hope I answered that question.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the other speakers? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, maybe I'm talking too much, but I think this is interesting to me. Private sector, integration of private sector has been discussed in many countries. I work heavily in Africa and Latin America, and I visited India and Bangladesh a few times in the last few years. Now, one thing we need to make sure that we understand, when you talk about waste management, collection of waste in developing countries, I just want to focus only on one component. Collection of waste in developing countries, especially in Africa and South Asia, is very minimum. It's less than 50%. So when you talk about implementation of circular economy, we talk about implementation of new technologies and bringing them to the sustainable waste management system. If we don't increase the collection, there is no way we can go to the circular economy. And we cannot get rid of all the diseases that comes with uncollected waste that's ending up in ocean or in the river or in a water channel within the city. And many times this plastic waste gets into the drainage channel. So this plastic never degrades. And if there is a drainage channel, what happens? The drainage system doesn't work. And it is when there is a rain, city is under the water. So the private sector can play a very important role in increasing the waste collection in cities or in the communities or mega cities. There are many examples, especially in Nigeria, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Kenya. Private sector, integration of private sector into the waste collection changed their waste collection system completely. So is there a challenge integrating the private sector in the waste management? Yes. Can they help? The answer is also yes. So government have to come up with ways. And in some cases, you don't have to privatize everything. It can be, public and private combined together. They can work together in the beginning. Then they can separate. So there is also another thing, the government has to incentivize the private community, because some cases their business is not continuous. Some cases there is ups and downs in the market. So they need to make sure that private company feel assured that when they're in the business, they will be taken care by the government. They will be subsidized somehow through the government. Okay, thank you very much.
And also let me add another point to what Professor Hussain just said. The examples that he provided on collection in 4 countries, if those are documented and then circulated well to the other countries as examples of best practice, that will be wonderful opportunity to eventually bring those out in the open in a much wider manner. That's one of my thoughts. My second thought, which comes from what Professor Vishwanathan said about making product from waste plastics. Plastics, when you make a product from plastics, you just not use a polymer, and I'm putting my engineer's hat on. You also add the fillers to give it strength. And therefore, there is a number of times that you can technically, and in an engineering sense, that you can circulate it and make other products. There will come a time when it will become end-of-life plastics. Then the question then is, what do you do with that end-of-life plastics? The solutions, technical solutions, based on chemistry, is to bring them back in the form of monomers, where they originated in the first place. But what also can be done, and it has been demonstrated now at a bench scale, is that you can separate the carbon and the hydrogen. Oils generated from end-of-life plastics are essentially hydrocarbons of one kind or the other. These are CXHY. So you can break the C and the hydrogen bond, and you can still sustain the process by using some of the energy that you will generate during the bond breaking process once you have been able to start the process. The point I'm trying to make is, it is a technical problem, but it is not an insurmountable problem, and there is a technical solution. Economics is currently being worked out, and this is being tried in many countries. BASF is one example, they have this chem recycling, as we call it. So the technical solutions are there.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. I can see Dr. Mohanty raising his hand, and then Ajay.
Yes, I'm just trying to follow the discussion that we're having. Is it all about urban solid waste? Are we discussing about urban solid waste management and the role of private sector? Or is it all types of waste? Because we need to keep in mind that any product that actually we buy, already it has made waste somewhere else. Okay? Whatever we actually throw away, before that maybe 90% is actually wasted during its excavation, transportation, manufacturing, etc. So if you include all that, when you're talking about solid waste in the urban context, we're only talking about roughly about 10% of it. 90% is lost somewhere else. Okay? So if you need to think about that, the policy is much more wide. And I go back to what Professor Vishwanathan said. He mentioned about how do you make these policies to look at reduce at source. Okay? So, and that's where circular economy becomes much more powerful, because we are going to the manufacturers and not looking at the user side.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. Ajay, please.
Yeah, Alvi, thanks. I just want to react to what Dr. Sadat mentioned about the waste being generated in South Asia is lesser than any other place. I mean, maybe some compared to some other states. For matter, Sadat, you left probably country 30 years ago, Mumbai. Now, if you look at Mumbai, Delhi, they contribute, top 10 cities in India, they contribute almost 150,000 metric ton per day. Imagine where do you get a place with the congested urban areas with the high urbanization of 30 million people each city having the living habitats in those cities, Delhi, Mumbai. So that's one aspect. So I know I agree with Dr. Mohanty and Bisu had mentioned about the lifestyle behavior, and those are the soft side of the things you take action. I mentioned to him on the chat that polluter pays first. When I'm talking about urban waste, it is not, I'm not only talking about solid waste management or household waste. commercial, there is a fecal sludge which is coming big way. All primary treatment systems of countries, large cities changing into tertiary, secondary, tertiary. So you get more sludge coming, and that is also going to land in some places. That's another problem. The third one is actually the lifestyle changing, bringing additional waste actually. And as you know that private sector did get into this the urban waste management, but they couldn't succeed. Because the calorific value was not enough to generate power to to take their return from the investment. Number two, our urban local bodies reforms is still 30s, 40s, it's not done. We don't have a financial autonomy for urban local bodies, barring few cities, Mumbai, Gurgaon, or other cities. So that's another thing. Then the control structures, the urban legislation is not helping. So thereby, what I was mentioning, Dr. Mohanty, in the chat is that why not, like we pay when you use water supply, you get 10 KLD of water, I pay 9 KLD water as a sewage charges. Why not the household to pay as a urban waste or household waste, let's say 600 kilogram per person, 4 person, 2.4 kilo per day, take it to some, this is household waste, this is other waste, and then they charge something, and charge to the people who can pay, not to the people at the lowest, like we have in Delhi, for example, 20,000 liters of water is given free to all citizens. Beyond that, their charges. So similar constraint I was trying to mention. Thank you, Sadar. Maybe you need to visit India to say something really.
One point, Ajay, thank you. Yes. You have great points. When I said the waste is less, I didn't say generation. I said waste collection. We generate a lot more waste in South Asia, but compared to generation, the collection is less compared to other countries. So if the collection is less, uncollected waste end up in water channel, lakes. Some of the lakes that as a child, when I visited in Dhaka, they were in, lake, like pure lake, you can see clear water. Now they are no longer lakes. You cannot even sit next to them because it's completely filled with uncollected garbage. So you are right, the waste generation is increasing there because economic condition is getting better, but the collection is still not up to the mark. And the private sector can play a big role increasing the collection in these cities. That's what I meant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add a couple of words from my side as a financier, probably one has to look at, I fully agree with Mohanty and all the others, and Visu, of course, one role what private sector can play is to reduce waste. And if you go to a shopping mall, if they're not giving you a plastic but a paper bag, that basically reduces the waste which is difficult to treat. And I think from that viewpoint, governments can bring in policies to bring private sector to get to those areas to reduce waste. I can still remember when I walked into a market in Dhaka, maybe 15 years, 20 years ago. I had to carry the bunch of bananas, just expose myself because there were no plastic bags given. They said no plastics here at the time. I don't know now. So you can bring in those regulations and the policies so that the waste can be reduced, and the private sector can play a major role in that. Yeah.
Just time check. It's actually 12 minutes past the hour of 5 Vietnam time. Let me just read another question from Momien here. In Switzerland, carbon tax is a good source of generating income from climate change. It is 98 Swiss francs per ton of carbon produced. The annual income from climate change is 1.2 billion Swiss francs. 2/3 of revenues goes to pension fund and health insurance support. 1/3 goes to technology improvement. Should developing countries generate income from climate change similar way instead of getting external funding? Any thoughts from our speakers? Yes, Professor Dakal.
Yes, actually, I was raising hand for other things, but I think I can answer this question. No problem. Yeah, I think carbon tax is not something very new. We have carbon tax since 1992. Sweden was perhaps one of the first country to impose carbon tax, and it depends on the exchange rate. But their carbon tax in places like Switzerland or Scandinavian countries is very, very high. At one time, it went up to $168 per ton of carbon in Sweden, because that depends on exchange rate also. But what I'm trying to say is that yes, carbon tax is good. Carbon tax is something we call as an overarching policy, which really influence lots of our action. If you look at Southeast Asia, Singapore became the first country to impose carbon tax. From January 1st, 2019, Singapore is imposing $5 Singapore dollar per ton of carbon as a carbon tax. Now the Indonesia has already announced that Indonesia will go for carbon tax. But I think carbon tax is a good way. But again, what we have to think also is the carbon tax is something overarching policy which can get into the different sectors, and it help us to move us from fossil fuel sector to the other sectors, particularly renewable energy sector. But also we have to keep in mind what would be the impact of carbon tax on different segment of society and how the resources are used. For example, carbon tax should not affect the poor and vulnerable people, and also the carbon tax should contribute to overall economic efficiency, and also how the revenue. I think the question was on revenue. How the revenue of carbon tax is used, it really depends from country to country. If you really look at many countries which have imposed carbon tax, there are different rules for different countries. For example, for Japan imposed very small carbon tax, but in Japan, rule is very clear. The money collected from carbon tax must be used for climate change mitigation. That money even cannot be used for climate change adaptation. That money has to be used for climate change mitigation. So, but in some other country, carbon tax collected from the pool can be used for other things, also for development financing and even to bridge the government budget. So I think that situation changes from country to country. But yes, I wouldn't say carbon tax is needed, but the carbon pricing is needed definitely, which can be done through many different ways. There are 4 or 5 different ways through which we can do carbon pricing, but carbon tax is one of the way of doing the carbon pricing.
Thank you, Professor Dakal. May we hear from Professor Roy?
Yeah, I'll just give an example that how the developing countries are doing in terms of carbon pricing. So carbon tax is only one of the instruments which you can impose to bring in the carbon price. And just to relate it to the earlier discussion also, carbon price is something which can fill a gap in the distorted market, which can help in circular economy concept also. I'm not going in that direction, but just to give an example, in India, there was from 2014 or 16, no, I think before 2012 actually, there was a carbon, cess, which is a fiscal instrument, similar as tax, but in public finance, it is known as a cess because the money collected goes back to the sector for development of that sector. So in India, we had a carbon cess, which was initially $6 per ton of carbon, but this was raised to more than $10 per ton of carbon. And a National Clean Coal Fund was created with that, and that money has been invested a lot in terms of renewable energy expansion. And secondly, the carbon pricing also came through perform, achieve, and trade in the industry sector, where the 9 designated consumers, like the large industries, had to trade their energy, fossil fuel energy certificates so that they can increase their energy efficiency. So it's not that developing countries have never tried. There are many, many examples. I can bring in many examples. So that has been tried and money has been raised, but all studies show that that money is not going to be enough for decarbonization of any economy, because the amount of money needed for decarbonization is not going to be enough through a carbon price system. So carbon price can be only one of the instruments among many other mitigation policies.
Thank you, Professor Wright. We have two, Dr. Mohanty, I think you have raised, and then Professor Chetiapan, and then we'll have one more question, last question before we close the session. Dr. Mohanty, please.
Yeah, Professor Roy has already partially answered the question. She mentioned about the PAT scheme, which is actually extended to now 13 sectors, not 9. It was 9 in the past, now it is extended to 13 sectors. But the other fact that we need to understand is it is not very coherent in the sense that Priyanta in his presentation mentioned about subsidy for fossil fuel. There are many countries, developing countries, not only developing, even industrialized countries, which continue to subsidize fossil fuel. So when you talk about tax, we first need to remove the subsidies that are there. That would make much more sense because, like in the case of India, coal has been taxed, but not the other types of fuels. Some of them are subsidized to a great extent. So instead of giving direct subsidy, we need to find other ways. Priyanta again talked about innovative financing. How do you bring in new types of financing by which people can afford better technologies and reduce the consumption? It's not just by taxing. We need to look at how do you create the right type of infrastructure by which we can reduce the demand for certain types of fuels which are leading to carbon emissions.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. Do we have Professor Chetiapan, you still have something to comment?
No, it's okay. I think it's already covered. So thank you very much.
Okay, let me just have the last question on the chat box from Dr. Salil. Would the panelists have a view of waste or debris outside the terrestrial habitats? Marine floats of waste is altering the absorptivity of solar. Any comment from our last comments from our panel?
Yes, let me add something in here. The majority of the marine waste, the floating, many of you will know about the Pacific garbage patch, has been created over decades. Without going into who created it, it is there. It is a multilateral solution that has to come by involving the countries in those regions and assisting them to actually collect it. If it's a collection issue, not anything other than that is not right. If this can be collected effectively, there is a way to dispose it. The technology is there. Simply because it's a predominantly polymeric waste. It will come at a cost, but it has to happen with the participation of several countries assisted by the multilateral institutions.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. Right. So again, in the interest of time, let's now recognize and give our round of applause virtually to our speakers and moderators and plenary panelists. Professor Shobhakar Dakal, Professor Joyashree Roy, Mr. Had Dangson, Dr. Bapon Akurudin, Professor Sankar Bhattacharya, Professor Sahadat Hussain, Professor Animesh Dutta, Dr. Priyanta Nijayatunga, Professor Chetiapan Viswanathan, Dr. Brahman Mohante. Please give a round of applause to our really excellent speakers. Thank you and congratulations. Yeah. Maybe before we have the closing remarks, maybe request everyone to please put on your camera for a photo op. I think from a staff AIT extension would like to take some photo. Please put on your camera, please. Thank you. Who's taking the
On the count of three, we will take
Okay.
pictures. Please, yeah, please wait. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. There are 2 screens to me, so I'll take picture. Take one more. On the count of 3 again. 1, 2, 3. Very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And now may I call on our symposium chair to give the closing remarks. Xavi Fernando, 8082.
May I ask the panelists, the moderators, do they have anything else to say? Perhaps you all made the contribution, or do you want to wind up before I do the honors?
Yeah, let me sincerely thank all the speakers in both the sessions. But if I want to pick up a couple of gentlemen, one is Professor Datta and the one is Professor Hussain. They come from a time region where it was 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. We are really grateful for their time to come on board and participate in this forum.
Yes, I just like to say only one sentence, which I really liked that Dr. Mohanty said. I think, can we design ourselves than designing the technology? I think the type of things we discussed, whether it's waste management, whether it is climate change, whether it is energy, environment, yes, we have lots of options, we have a lot of solutions, and we have a lot of technology. But after all, it all comes back to us. So I think I'd like to urge all of us, as my final remark, to think, how can we redesign ourselves, and how do we put our best effort to this global environmental crisis that we live on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. We come to a very, very long day's proceedings. We started off at 8 o'clock in the morning at Vietnam time, and here we are almost some minutes past 5 o'clock. I really need to mention a few people. I thank the 2 moderators, Professors Shobhak Takhal and Shankar Bhattacharya, for very ably managing the 2 parallel sessions with a little bit of technical glitches and the panel discussion very effectively. The expertise was seen very well in the manner they contributed throughout the discussions as well. I thank the 6 speakers. I'll not go into detail about each of them, who took great pains, I'm sure, to prepare well and make their presentations both meaningful and interesting. The 2 panelists who contributed with their opening remarks and during the panel discussions as well, enormously helpful to many those who participated here. I must place on record my deep appreciation to Praveen Dabukya, who persistently followed up the speakers to run a seamless session. Alvin, the symposium secretary, who helped me along with our selection of panelists and the speakers, who helped me to select a very good collection of resource persons. I thank the Vietnam chapter chair, Mr. Quen, who provided a very informative web link and the banners for the occasion. The IIT Extension Office, led by Dr. Chris Gania. Without them, this wouldn't have been so easy for us to do. And Dr. Palwe and her team for excellent logistics. I also thank Faye, our president, and the executive committee of AITAA, who stood behind me in my efforts to get this enormously challenging exercise done. I thank everyone who attended this forum. Without them, that would have been that would have been an utter flop. So we were very much encouraged by almost 65 people who were there throughout. Well, finally, but not the least, I must say a very big thank you for our very new, brand new, maybe less than 2 months, young and very energetic AIT Association, Alumni Association Program Officer, Queen Min Thian. Very young, but ably followed up in every little detail I told him. I would have been a pain to him most of the time. With very little experience, he did a wonderful job. If I miss anyone, please do excuse me. I thank every one of you and have a pleasant evening, pleasant day from wherever you are. I know we only spoke about the Western people. We did not speak about the Far East, Bhopal, who is also might be very much in the dead in the night. So I thank everyone who committed themselves, irrespective of their time differences, to take part, and including the people who spoke in the morning, Professor Mohan Singha, then the other two speakers from Vietnam as well as USA, Nick Quayas, Professor Tuk from Vietnam. They all contributed a lot from morning. So it's been a really, really long day for most of us. And I thank everyone behind the scene, especially our team from the AIT Alumni Association and AIT Extension. Thank you very much. From me, it's good evening to you. For the others who are having good sleep, sleep well. And for those who are getting up in the morning, have a good day.
Thank you, Xavi, and we hope to see you again tomorrow at 8 o'clock Vietnam time for the Agriculture, Food, and Water technical session. That will be followed at 10 o'clock, also Vietnam time, the Digital Transformation and Smart Cities technical session. So once again, thank you very much indeed. Stay safe, healthy, and happy always. Good evening, everyone. It's 5:30 in Vietnam time. Thank you.